In the desolate northern lands of South Korea, a group of hunters set out on a campaign to clear the area of evil spirits. The participants included both seasoned hunters, for whom such expeditions were a routine matter, and those who were embarking on such a trip for the first time. It was natural for the newcomers to be nervous, but their elders encouraged them, reminding them that the main thing was to remain attentive. Ordinary portals and dungeons were far less dangerous than uninhabited lands. These were territories where no human had set foot since the beginning of time, and therefore they were teeming with monsters. Sometimes you could even encounter one or two ancient creatures, much stronger than ordinary monsters. The leader of the group was a representative of the famous Lee warrior clan, which instilled some peace of mind in the newcomers. They considered him a strong warrior. However, those more knowledgeable knew that he was far from the strongest, just a bastard, expelled from the clan for his mediocrity and lack of ambition. His name was Lee Chol, the ninth illegitimate son of the Lee clan, who at his age had only reached the seventh rank in martial arts. After a short rest, one of the Dark Sword Squad's fighters, who reported directly to the clan patriarch, suggested continuing on their way. Chol agreed, but he was overcome by an uneasy feeling. It seemed that the warriors were guarding him not to protect him, but to kill him. This heavy thought haunted him the whole way, as did the question, why do they need all this? After all, Chol had been expelled from the clan and, as a bastard, had long since lost his value in the eyes of the family. But once upon a time, like everyone else, he dreamed of the future and hoped for the best. But at some point, everything went wrong. Even as a child, he realized his responsibility as a possible heir to the strongest warrior clan. During the Ritual of Steel selection, which determined the future of each warrior, he received the finest weapon from the clan's arsenal. Chol decided that fate was giving him a chance, and all he had to do was work hard to earn recognition. But the miracle didn't happen. Soon, the clan's doctor discovered a strange pattern of meridians, the channels through which energy flows in the human body. The permeability of his channels was so low that practicing magic was impossible, and martial arts were extremely difficult. In his case, even reaching rank 9 would be considered a true miracle. The butler immediately informed the patriarch about the illness of the young heir. This was a huge disappointment for the patriarch. Chol could have become one of the strongest warriors if not for his illness. From that day on, everyone in the clan knew about his peculiarity, and his success at the ritual of choosing steel was attributed to chance. However, Chol continued to train diligently and proved the doctor wrong. By the age of 25, he had reached the 7th rank, although his brothers had achieved this in childhood. However, his efforts were underestimated, and at the age of 30 he was expelled from the clan. If it weren't for his older brother, Chol would have been killed and buried without a trace. Since then, he wandered the world for 10 years, hiding from his relatives. These were hard times, like a struggle for survival in hell itself. The world was gradually changing. Uninhabited lands were expanding. Monsters were attacking more and more often. Only those who had the patronage of strong clans were able to survive. One day, Chol learned from the news of the death of his father, the patriarch of the Lee clan. Soon, people from the Dark Sword Squad, the personal guard of the Lee clan, arrived to him. Chol was amazed at how they found him, because now he looked like an ordinary beggar. The soldiers did not answer his questions, they only conveyed the order. He was not surprised by their silence. The warriors of the Dark Sword were always taciturn. However, the contents of the order shocked him. He was to reconnoiter the uninhabited Zone B1, and the meeting with the expedition was scheduled for 1830. The order was signed by the new patriarch Lee Gun-son, his third brother. This shocked Chol. He was sure that power would pass to his older brother, who was more benevolent towards him. Chol suspected that something had happened to his brother, but the squad's fighters remained silent. He tried to object, saying that he hadn't held a sword for a long time and was only a 7th rank master. What use was there? But his words were interpreted as a refusal to obey the patriarch's order, and refusal without good reason was punishable by death. Chol, having weighed everything, agreed to carry out the order, although he did not believe in his own strength. He arrived at the gathering place and set off with the group. Soon, one of the participants noticed a strange building in the distance, an abandoned estate. It was rare to see something like this in these lands, especially since the building looked almost untouched. One of the squad's fighters ordered everyone to go inside. Armed with swords, the group cautiously entered the estate. Their attention was immediately drawn to the giant skull of an ancient monster with a sword sticking out of its mouth. The expedition members froze in surprise. At this moment, the Dark Sword Squad suddenly attacked their companions, attacking them from behind. They killed everyone indiscriminately without any explanation. Chul was shocked. He knew about the Dark Sword's cruelty, but he didn't expect such a senseless massacre. He and another survivor shouted at the attackers, demanding an explanation. But the warriors silently continued to kill, obeying the order. Chol, although he had not fought for a long time, managed to wound one of the attackers. Then he learned that the order for his murder had been given by the patriarch himself, Lee Gunsong. He ordered that they be lured here and eliminated without a trace. The dark sword fighter easily broke Chol's sword, turning it into pieces. He added that they were supposed to be killed painlessly only if there was no resistance. The surviving participants desperately tried to save themselves. But the difference in power level was insurmountable, like a chasm. Chol found himself in a hopeless situation. Weakened, unarmed, unable to defend himself. He became an easy target for the enemies. Although more was expected of him, even despite his weakness, the reality turned out to be harsh. Even a newbie who had just begun his training could defeat Chul, and yet he did not want to die so easily. To give even the slightest resistance, he needed a weapon. Chol looked around for a sword, but it was all useless. And then his gaze fell on the sword in the mouth of the ancient monster. He thought, if this sword could kill such a creature, maybe it would also be able to defeat a person. So he decided to immediately grab the sword and pull it out of his skull to fight off the Dark Sword Squad. But his joy did not last long. The entire plan he had just thought out collapsed. The sword turned out to be so old and ancient that only a small part of it remained, and a strange black aura emanated from the fragment. One of the squad members, seeing this, began to laugh, because he did not expect that Chol would be so weak and helpless. It was only by right of belonging to the Lee family that he granted Chul an honorable death. Chol's life's journey has come to an end, but as a child he dreamed of becoming the patriarch of the Lee clan, who would be remembered for centuries. But fate had something else in store for him. His whole life was a struggle, and in the end it turned into an endless escape. Chul couldn't understand why fate had been so cruel to him, despite his persistence. And suddenly, a strange aura began to emanate from the sword, enveloping his body. In an instant, he opened his eyes. In front of him stood his father, whom he thought was dead, and the butler Choi, discussing Yu Jung, Cheol's mother, who died under mysterious circumstances. Lee Tae-shin was Cheol's father and the patriarch of the famous Lee clan, but both he and Choi looked too young, which seemed strange. Chol wanted to say something, but he could only stretch out his hands to be noticed. And then he saw. His hands became like a baby's, which surprised him greatly. Now his hands were like a baby's. Had he been thrown back into the past? Or was this just a death dream? Chol didn't understand what had happened to him. He had been killed. Was he really just imagining it all? Tae-shin decided that while he was little, he would be called Yun, and assigned him a nanny and guards from the Dark Sword Squad. He also ordered Chol to undergo the Steel Selection Ritual, along with the eighth child. The eighth child was Tae-shin's daughter, Yuna's eldest by only a couple of months. But Tae-shin assured that the age difference did not matter, and the ritual should be carried out immediately. Chol was still confused, not fully understanding what was happening. Soon Tae-shin and Choi left, and Yun had a lot to think about, including how to proceed. Everything that was happening did not resemble a memory or a dream. It seemed frighteningly real. Moreover, the conversation between the father and the butler actually took place in the past, when Yun was a child. And although it was hard to believe, everything indicated that Yun had returned to the past. Several months have passed since his return, and today is an important day for the Lee clan. The ritual of steel selection is a ritual in which the weapon itself chooses the clan's heir, reflecting his talents. At one time, dozens of swords chose Tae-shin, making him the greatest swordsman of his time. And the elder brother Lee Myung-jun chose swords, scrolls, and even a staff, and so he became a famous battle mage. Today, Yun had to go through a ritual, and his future depended on it. He was to be accompanied to the ritual site by his nanny, Moon Ga-hwa, who became his second mother. Both in the past and now, she fiercely supported Yun, and believed that he would become a worthy successor. Ga-hwa always wanted the best for him and stayed by his side no matter what. In Chol's past life, her loyalty cost her her place in the clan. She was fired due to enemy slander. She was then the only person who truly worried about Chol. But in this life, Cheol is determined to prevent her expulsion and will do everything to protect Ga-hwa. And now, the moment has come to go to the arena to conduct the ritual of choosing steel. Even now, Ga-hwa continued to support the young master, assuring him that the ritual would be successful. The head of the clan was notified of the readiness of the ritual and invited to the arena. Tae-shin was also curious about the outcome, especially for a child born from another woman. Everything was ready, all that was left was to begin. Today was truly a momentous day for the Lee clan, a day that will go down in history. The ritual of choosing steel was held in an arena filled with clan members. Of particular interest was the newborn Yoon, born out of wedlock. This did not give peace to the clan matriarch, Baek Hwa-young. Next to her sat the clan's advisor, Lee Tae-hong, who supported the young man. Also present was the clan's first heir, Lee Myung-jun. Next to him sat the second heir, Lee Gun-song. Yoon attracted Tae-hong's interest, despite the majority opinion that the boy was a bastard. Myung-jun was interested in the very fact of performing a ritual on such a small child. Gun-song agreed with him, suspecting something unkind about it. He dreamed of seizing power in the clan and considered Yoon's appearance a serious threat, just like in Chol's past life. But the time had come to begin the ritual. Everything was ready and everyone had gathered. The first to undergo the ritual was the eighth heir of the Lee clan, Lee Hwa. Hwa was Yoon's older sister, though only a couple of months older. To activate the ritual, the participant's blood was needed. Tae-shin carefully cut her finger with a knife. The child became frightened and began to cry, but the blood fell onto the pedestal, activating the ritual. There was silence all around, and the air was filled with a bright blue light, like an energy beam. The beam pointed to a sword, a relic from the armory, a sword made of ivory, a true masterpiece of blacksmithing art, which was not recognized by anyone for a long time. Now the ivory sword was given to Hwa, and she became its rightful owner. The clan's servants took this as a great event and congratulated the matriarch on her talented heiress. She was happy, but she was still tormented by thoughts of Yuna, the fruit of her husband's secret love. Now it was the turn of the next participant, Yoon, who was considered a bastard. The crowd began to discuss and condemn the actions of the clan leader. But Tae-shin had confidence in Yoon and believed in his potential. Yoon didn't cry when his finger was cut, showing resilience. Before the ritual, Tae-shin said that he was proud of Yoon despite the rumors. In his past life, Cholya chose the heavenly rank sword Pure Echo, a powerful weapon. Now Yoon was curious about what weapon would choose him in this life. There was a tense silence all around. Only whispers could be heard. There were also those who watched silently, like Hwa-young, whose eyes flashed with cold fury. Her reaction was natural. She was watching the child born from her husband's infidelity. Yoon's future in the Lee clan will be difficult. He will have to go through a lot. For example, some elders who are dissatisfied with his existence will interfere with him, especially the chief elder of the Lee clan, Lee Cheol-jun. Tae-hong knew that someone like Lee Cheol-jun would only cause trouble, and advised him to be careful. A short dialogue ensued between them, the topic of which was young Mr. Yoon. Cheol-jun condemned Tae-shin, declaring that he did not understand what the clan leader was thinking when he performed the ritual of choosing steel on a bastard born of an unknown father. He also reproached Tae-hong for the fact that he, more than anyone else, should know that it was pointless to carry out such a ritual for illegitimate children. After all, Tae-hong, just like Yoon, was an illegitimate son whom no weapon had chosen. Cheol-jong believed that such a thing was not only useless but also unacceptable, since such children had no right to belong to the clan. But Tae-hong did not remain silent and decided to rudely answer the clan elder. But his words were interrupted by a bright glow. Cheol-jun and Tae-hong were amazed to see a light coming from right at the center of the ritual. Tae-hong, like Cheol-jun, was shocked by what he saw, because before that he was not sure whether Yoon would be able to go through the ritual. The bright blue beam was unusually powerful, as if unimaginable energy was emanating from it. It was impossible to describe this spectacle in words. It captivated everyone. The beam that was choosing the weapon for the successor first pointed to the blood spirit spear, and then to the fused sword. After that, he enveloped the relics Divine Crossbow of the Sensitive Dragon and Divine Sword of Mahu. The center of the ritual was bathed in a bright blue light, and all participants were beside themselves with amazement. But the most surprising thing was that the beam reacted even to weapons that already had an owner. Myung-jun was stunned by what he saw, calling it an unimaginable miracle, and noted that their younger brother seemed to have incredible talent. There was also talk in the crowd about how this was possible, since illegitimate children could not have the gift. However, Tae-shin called for everyone to remain calm, assuring that the steel selection ritual could not be wrong. By clan law, any weapon that chose the boy must be given to him. But the situation was so unusual that he decided to listen to suggestions. Tae-hong expressed the opinion that, although such was the law, Giving all the weapons to Yun would distort the very essence of the ritual. So he suggested letting the boy choose his own weapon. The clan leader accepted this proposal and allowed Yun to make a choice. The young gentleman had an unusually wide choice before him. Almost all the weapons in the vicinity chose him. Now he had to choose one that would become his main weapon. However, Yun noted that everything was different from the past. Then he had chosen only one powerful sword, but now he had an entire arsenal before him. But he considered this a good sign. The future depended on his choice and he should not miss his chance. And he went to the sword that was to become his destiny. The choice was truly difficult. It was also chosen by Fra, a dragon slayer sword of enormous power. He was also attracted to spears, such as the Holy Spear, which could be an excellent weapon. And at the same time, Valheim, a staff made from the branches of the World Tree, or the Sword of the Heavenly Spheres, forged during the Parade of the Planets. Great examples of weapon art awaited his decision, but he chose a rare sword found by the clan's founder in unknown lands, the mysterious Black Twilight. All that was known about it was that it could not be classified as a heavenly sword. However, it was kept among them, because it was the sword of the founder of the Lee clan himself. Throughout the clan's existence, the sword had never chosen anyone, and Yun became the first one to be recognized by the Black Twilight. Taishin took this as a sign from heaven, and announced that Yun had chosen the Black Twilight sword and the ritual was complete. This outcome did not suit Hua Young at all. She intended to get rid of him if he got in her way. 9 years have passed since the Steel Choice ritual was held, and much has changed. Young Master Yun grew up and began training, officially becoming the 9th son of the famous Lee warrior clan. He was supported in everything by Gahua, who became like a replacement for his own mother. Yun always went to the first gym to train, which made Gahua curious, as it was far from the most spacious. But Yun replied that someone was waiting for him there, so he was going there. Their conversation was interrupted by loud sounds coming from the 7th training ground. At that time, Hua, Yun's older sister, was training there, enthusiastically practicing her strikes. Yun called her 8th, but Gahua pointed out that it was impolite. To him, she was an older sister. However, Yun didn't understand why he had to call her that, since she was only 5 months older than him. Hua's training was vigorous. The teacher constantly corrected her, showing her how to hold the sword and strike correctly. This made the daughter of the Lee family quite angry, and she repeatedly snapped at Mr. Beck. She didn't understand why it was important to hold the sword in a certain way, but Mr. Beck assured her that it was for her own good. He explained that she just needed persistence, and with time everything would work out. Yun wondered who was teaching his sister martial arts. According to Gahua, it was Commander Baek Lee Hyun of the Ebony Squad, a powerful warrior. The boy became even more curious. Why would such an outstanding warrior train a 9-year-old girl? Gahua took his words as envy towards her sister, since she was taught by a real master, while Yun trained alone. She assured him that soon they would find him a teacher who would appreciate his talent. She blamed herself for this, believing that she had failed to cope with her duties as a teacher. But Yun assured her that he was grateful for everything, and she shouldn't think so. He added that he didn't need a teacher, since Lee Hyun taught Hua only out of respect for their father. After this, the young man headed to the first hall, intended for training the heirs. This hall was a historical site of the Lee clan, more like a museum than a training ground. But Yun didn't come here to admire history. The hall's special feature was that it housed the Lee clan's most ancient weapons. It was badly battered by time, but that didn't matter to Yun. After he returned from the past, many changes happened to him. One of them was the ability to read the memories of weapons. Using this ability, he could move to the moments when this weapon was in combat. He could find out the age of the weapon, the degree of attachment of the owner, and the technique of its use. This helped him improve his fighting skills faster. In addition, he could clearly see the sword's memories and master the techniques embedded in it. For example, the Red Wind technique from the 7-star sword. Thanks to the ability he was given, he learned all the movements of the 7-star sword and more. In 2 years, he mastered the memories of most of the ancient weapons in the hall. Suddenly, Tae Hong, the patriarch's half-brother and the clan's minister of war, approached him. He was highly respected and was one of the few who had genuinely cared for Yuna in the past. Yun respected Tai Hong, calling him uncle, although Tai Hong didn't like it too much. Tae Hong was proud of the young man for his persistence in training. He understood how hard it was for Yun because of his brother's attitude, but he believed that he would overcome all difficulties and prove his worth. Yun assured him that everything was fine because he was now part of the Lee clan, where the motto was, Respect is earned with the sword. He promised to become stronger and gain respect in battle, defeating all his enemies if necessary. Tae Hong was happy with his mood, but deep down he was sad that Yoon was born out of wedlock. But he decides to change the subject, hinting that the naming ceremony will take place soon. There is very little time left before it. And even so, Tai Hong would like to become the young master's teacher, thinking in advance that he would agree. But Yoon still had a different opinion and replied that he could not accept his offer, which shocked Tai Hong, who did not understand the reason for the refusal. The boy explained that due to clan rules, he could not become anyone's disciple until he was given a name. Tae Hong noted that his brothers and sisters have long ignored these rules, so they are well fed and taught by the best teachers. But the young gentleman only replied that one cannot break the rules, even if everyone around them breaks them. Besides, as he already said, he wants to gain respect with the sword, and not by other means. The boy's words surprised Tai Hong. In him, he saw the features of his older brother, Yoon's father, Tai Shin, and yet he decided to retreat, respecting the choice and life path of the young master. Only by calling the boy as stubborn as his father did, Tai Hong think that Yoon would become an excellent heir and head of the clan. But here's the problem. It seems like Tai Hong can't help the young master in any way, and this worries him. Yoon says that's not quite true, and there's something he'd like to ask. The young man would like to see what is underneath the secret warehouse, but he will not be able to get there himself. Tai Hong was surprised by the strange request, but he couldn't refuse. The next day, Tai Hong and Yoon went to the secret warehouse. The facility was strictly guarded, so before entering, one had to present documents and state the purpose of the visit. It would have been impossible for the youngest gentleman to get in here, but with Tai Hong, it was as easy as pie. Tae Hong presented the purpose of the visit as an audit of the warehouse, and took Yuna along with him supposedly to familiarize himself with the work of adults. The Lee clan members were loyal, so they readily said, "I serve the Lee clan." For the rest of the journey, Yoon feigned surprise so that Tai Hong wouldn't suspect anything. Tae Hong was curious if the boy really liked the secret warehouse area, but his reaction seemed sincere. Yoon added that the interest was unusual, as not only the clan's treasures were kept there, but also the best weapons. It was here that the young master desperately needed was located. Legendary swords, relics whose existence is hard to believe until you see them for yourself. If anyone is looking for such things, they will be told, "We are sure to have this at Lee's armory." The young gentleman feigned extreme surprise, and Tai Hong, unaware of the pretense, rejoiced. On the way, Tai Hong told them that weapons were stored in the basement of the warehouse, which for some reason had been isolated. Yoon added that he had heard of the existence of a monstrous rank weapon that could devour its owner. Tae Hong was surprised by the young man's knowledge and confirmed that such a weapon really does exist. It devours the owner's heart and body down to the bones. In this way, he wanted to scare the young man, but to no avail. Tae Hong went to the upper floors on business, inviting the young gentleman to look around, but warning him not to go into the basement. Yoon was pleased with this development despite the ban. While Tai Hong is busy, Yoon will have a chance to find what he needs. The basement of the secret armory, also known as the weapons cemetery, served as a place for isolating dangerous artifacts. The goal of this trip is to find a weapon called Limitless, which initially appears as an ordinary dagger. But if you fill it with mana, it can change shape and weight. Gunsong once found this weapon and received the title The Changeable, reflecting its essence. This is why in the past, Gunsong became the patriarch after Tae-shin's death, and not the eldest son, even though he was more suitable. He also ordered to find and kill Yoon. So far, this is all that has been found out. To avoid such a fate, the young master must find a suitable sword himself. It may not work the first time, but Yoon is determined to earn the title of the Changeable One. However, the cheerful mood quickly turned to alarm. An hour passed, and a suitable weapon was still not found. Finding Boundless turned out to be more difficult than it initially seemed. But Yoon was sure it was here somewhere. Perhaps it had simply been moved. By chance, he touched a rusty ancient sword which fell to the ground. The young man didn't even imagine that it could be limitless, mistaking it for an old piece of iron. But something went wrong when he tried to count the history of the weapon. It seemed that it was not he who was learning the history of the dagger, but the dagger who was studying him. In an instant, the young gentleman was transported to another world, to the memories of the dagger. At first, he didn't understand where he was, but soon he realized that these were most likely memories. These memories were far more realistic and vivid than anything he had seen before. So alive that any rustle made him shudder. And for good reason. He was not alone here. There was something terrible lurking in the memories that made the blood run cold. An ancient monster that once emerged from a blue portal and devoured entire civilizations. In front of Yun stood an apocalyptic rank monster with incredible strength. It was impossible to fight him. It was necessary to run. But an unknown man with a bloody sword appeared behind. Not only the sword was bloody, but also the man himself, who resembled a warrior. Yun didn't understand what was happening and what he should do. There was a monster and an unknown warrior nearby. Suddenly, the warrior rushed into attack, holding a sword. He seemed to know no fear. He attacked the monster without hesitation. To him, the monster that terrified Yun was like a low-ranking slime. With one blow, he cut it down like the demon slasher. The spectacle was so breathtaking that the young man was delighted. After the impact, an explosion erupted at the sight of the monster. Yun couldn't believe his eyes. The apocalyptic rank monster was defeated with one blow. He was scared, but he held on when a warrior appeared in front of him. He asked who he was and why he had come here. Yun was surprised because he was usually not noticed in memories. Without waiting for an answer, the demon slicer cut him with his sword, saying that he was doing it out of mercy to send him back. Yun was horrified, thinking that he had died in his world. He didn't understand how it happened. His hands were shaking and he dropped the dagger. The pressure was so strong that it almost bent me to the ground, and the dagger began to melt the surroundings. Soon Yun realized this was the very limitless one he was looking for. To make it his own, he performed a ritual similar to the ritual of choosing steel. Everything around began to shine, as in the legends, which signified the acceptance of the sword. Now the Boundless belonged to him, and thanks to it, Yun would be able to become the commander of 100,000 troops. The boy immediately decided to try out the new sword, using the martial arts he had learned. And he was pleasantly surprised. Now his life path would change forever. A week has passed since Yun obtained the Limitless, and he has already begun training. After a trip to a secret weapons depot, he transformed the Limitless into a ring so that no one would know of its existence. But he was still curious about what happened when he looked into the history of the dagger, namely, when he saw the blow demonstrated by that warrior. The warrior demonstrated the strike and called it Cutting Demon, but he must have thought that it was too early for the boy to learn such techniques. In addition to the crushing force, the blow was executed with extraordinary grace, which became a strong motivation for the young man. Although he doesn't know much yet, he's in no hurry. He has time to study ancient martial arts. Thanks to his memory and abilities, he was able to remember all the warrior's movements exactly. But this was of little use, because he was not a grown man but only a 9-year-old boy. Trying to copy the movements of an adult body was of little use to Yun. It was almost useless. Therefore, his goal became to adapt the technique to his childish body. The key here is to take your time and pay attention to detail so that your movements are natural. After all, you need to handle a sword in a way that is comfortable for your height and weight, or, in other words, adjust everything to your body. Well, the young man had already taken his first steps, and quite successfully. One could say he was moving in the right direction. All that remained was to learn how to use mana effectively. He'd tried for a long time to draw on his past life's experience, but nothing worked, as if he'd forgotten something important. So all he could do was continue to persistently develop his mana management skills. Without wasting any time, he continued practicing his strike when an unexpected guest sneaked in. Just as Yun swung his sword to strike the ground, the blade was grabbed by an unknown girl. The young man was extremely surprised. He was used to training alone, occasionally seeing only Tai Hong. Grabbing the blade, the girl asked the boy who taught him this technique, but Yun remained silent. He did not understand who was standing in front of him. He only guessed that it was someone from the family. She had the same dark hair and yellow eyes. The girl was also surprised by this. For some reason, she thought that Yun knew her, but this was nothing new to her. She said she rarely left the house. She introduced herself as Kyong Ha and then asked the young master's name. Kyong Ha was pleased to meet Yun. Unsure of her strength, she grabbed his hand and began shaking it with joy. Yun remembered hearing her name in a previous life, Kyong Ha, his father's younger sister. Tai Hong had talked about her and mentioned that his grandfather hadn't particularly liked her. However, he was surprised that Kyong Ha was completely unaware of how much power she actually possessed. Nevertheless, she insisted on her own. She was extremely interested in where Yun learned such a technique. Kyong Ha noticed that this blow had a hint of the ancient martial arts that she was passionate about. In addition, she said that in ancient times, giant creatures inhabited the earth. As a gift, she brought Yun a book related to ancient knowledge, with her own notes attached. Yun was delighted with such a gift. Perhaps with its help, he would find answers to his questions. And although the handwriting in the book was sometimes difficult to decipher, he came across a page describing a mana management technique. In addition, the book contained knowledge of ancient high-level martial arts, although deciphering the handwriting remained a problem. So he asked Kyong Ha to help him figure it out, and she was only too happy, especially given his interest in ancient techniques. Kyung Ha explained to him that in the past, only channels were used, not meridians, unlike modern techniques, where the center of energy is in the heart. She added that it was unfair to consider ancient techniques obsolete, something Yoon hadn't thought about before. Kyung Ha was confident that ancient methods of managing chi energy were superior to modern ones. Hearing this, Yoon immediately rushed to use the new technique, as it was the perfect one for the limitless. Mana should be distributed from the heart throughout the body, without returning back to the center. It must circulate through the channels. This is exactly what Yoon lacked to fully understand the warrior's strike. Now everything was different. With his new knowledge, he seemed to have succeeded. Yoon was pleasantly surprised, and Kyung Ha was stunned by what she saw. She had never seen anything like this. The young gentleman perceived this as a small but important victory. He confidently moved forward. Kyung Ha's interest only grew stronger. She wanted to know how he did it, and what kind of technique it was. Yoon replied that it was an empowering technique, but the pressure from Kyung Ha was too persistent. He was reluctant to share all the details, preferring to act silently. But Kyung Ha did not give up. After all, the boy was able to apply the technique after reading her notes, into which she had put years of work. She said she had been searching for a way to master the amplification technique for over 10 years, even after she was kicked out. In the end, Yoon agreed to tell, but put forward several conditions. The first condition was not to tell anyone about him without his permission, not even his father and uncle. Kyung Ha asked the reason, to which Yoon replied that he didn't like it when people talked about him behind his back. The girl accepted this with understanding, remembering her experience with sadness. The second condition was not to lie to each other, in order to build trust without unnecessary suspicion. This turned out to be difficult for Kyung Ha. She liked to keep things under wraps, but she still agreed. And there was a third condition, which Yoon decided to remain silent about for now. A year had already passed since the young master had received the Limitless and begun training with Kyung Ha. At that time, Ga Hwa came running to him with a letter. She ran and loudly called his name as she went, which slightly frightened Yoon. Ga Hwa handed over a letter addressed personally to the young master. Kyung Ha was also curious about what was there, but Yoon guessed that it was an invitation to the naming ceremony. And he was right. It was an official invitation signed by the deputy head of the clan, Myung-jun. This made the young man a little wary. Such letters must be signed by the head, but if he is not present, the duties pass to the deputy. Besides, he hadn't heard of his father leaving anywhere. However, for Kyung Ha, the news was extremely unpleasant. She was upset because she had just started learning new techniques with Yoon, and the ceremony will take quite a long time. It's not just an award ceremony, but a real test. Together, they explored mana manipulation techniques, combining ancient and modern knowledge. They managed to develop a method that combines both techniques, a dream that Kyung Ha had been working towards for many years. Now mana could be stored both in the heart and in the channels, which provided greater efficiency. That's why Kyung Ha didn't want Yoon to leave her. There was still so much work ahead. But Yoon reassured her, promising to quickly complete the ceremony and return to training. He was determined to pass the tests as quickly as possible and get back to learning the new technique. The first stage of the ceremony was a test of endurance. Participants had to withstand magical attacks for half an hour. The test was to be conducted by the Blood Tiger squad leader and teacher, Jang Wook. Jang Wook believed that the illegitimate boy would not be able to cope since he had not been specially trained. But he was wrong. Right now, Yoon was repelling magical attacks using his mana control. He even managed to distract himself during the test, for which the teacher considered him too insolent. Moreover, Yoon volunteered to compete with the 8th heiress, wanting to test his strength and skills. It was strange to Jang Wook. How could a bastard be so gifted? Calling him that no longer seemed appropriate. Ultimately, the teacher decided to reevaluate his views on Yoon, and even intended to personally teach him, not just for the sake of the ceremony. The first stage is complete. It was not particularly difficult for the young gentleman. And yet, Yoon considers it very strange to practice magical attacks on children, arguing that it increases their resistance. But what he didn't expect was an apology from teacher Jang Wook. It was quite sincere, and his tone had changed for the better. However, it was high time to go and rest to prepare for the next stage, but at the exit he was met by his older sister. she immediately decided to show aggression, trying to hit Yoon in the face. After such a loud greeting, Hwa insists that they need to talk. But Yoon responded rudely to rudeness and had no particular desire to talk to her. This angered Hwa, and she decided to once again remind her younger brother that she was a legitimate daughter, while he was a bastard. But Yoon didn't care about it. He simply replied that he didn't have time, as he didn't want to get involved with her. This took Hwa even more by surprise, and she decided to use force, this time using mana. But such a trick no longer worked on the current Yoon, who had spent a whole year honing his martial arts and mana control. He counterattacked her and grabbed her by the collar of her sweater, something Hwa had never expected. In a fit of emotion, Yoon told her to go and throw a tantrum at her mother because he didn't need it. But Hwa said that it was all because of him. If he hadn't demonstrated his talent at the steel selection ritual back then, everything would have been different. Since then, she was constantly compared to him, forced to follow a strict regimen and train daily, while Yoon seemed to be born gifted. The surge of emotions led to her losing control of her speech and accidentally admitting that her mother was to blame for everything. But the young man only replied that it was her fault, not his, because she had everything, and he had to achieve everything on his own. So if she really hates him so much, let her become better than him. Then he'll apologize for his words. That's the way this family works. Yoon left, and Hwa only shouted after him that she would definitely surpass him at the ceremony and make him apologize. But the young man didn't care what she was shouting. He was sure that he would be the winner. After this, Hwa returned to the 7th hall to continue her training. At this time, her mother, the patriarch of the Hwayan clan, came to see her, wanting to talk to her daughter alone. All this time, Hwa was training hard and didn't even notice her mother entering. She was surprised to hear her mother's voice and turn around to see her. Hwayan came because she was told that Hwa had performed worse than Yoon in training, something she considered unacceptable. This made Hwayoung furious, as she had spent years hammering into her daughter's head the idea of crushing her rivals. Hwayan was disappointed with her daughter and stated that it was better to give up the warrior's path if she was training only out of fear of her mother. But Hwa denied this, arguing that she was acting on her own free will and truly wanted to surpass her younger brother. These words shocked Hwayoung even more. She found it outrageous that her daughter was motivated by rivalry with some second-class child. Hwayan reminded him once again that her daughter was the legitimate heir to the clan, and Yoon was just a bastard, and she should be above him, not compete on equal terms. She then gave Hwa the sleepy wrath, a deadly poison, believing that if her daughter could not surpass the boy, she should destroy him. After all, these were the rules of the Lee family. Only the strongest had the right to life. Meanwhile, Yoon continued to progress, managing to raise his overall rank to 1 in just 14 weeks. For a 9-year-old boy, this was an excellent result, especially considering he studied on his own. Although he also credited Gahwa with this, but suddenly their conversation was interrupted by loud sounds, reminiscent of the trampling of elephants. Of course, it was Kyong Ha, who was eagerly awaiting the moment when she and Yoon could resume training. The young man had just returned from training, but Kyong Ha insisted, assuring him that training with mana techniques would relieve fatigue. Yoon had never heard of such a thing. On the contrary, he thought that such training was even more tiring. And yet the boy agreed. He also wanted to show his aunt something. Kyong Ha was beside herself with surprise. The young master had reached the 1st star. Typically, the study of mana techniques is divided into 3 stages. The first is Iron Body, which strengthens the physical form. The second is Qigong, when mana is transformed and requires great control. And the third is the Superpowers stage, when mana control reaches a level inaccessible to mere mortals. However, Kyong Ha's method was different. Even at the 1st stage, it was possible to achieve superpowers. Therefore, she divided the study of techniques into so-called stars. She wondered how he'd managed to master channeling energy so quickly. Yoon replied that it was thanks to their training, even though it sometimes made him uncomfortable. After all, mana is like water. It has a natural fluidity, and the human body is designed as a vessel for mana. This motivated Kyong Ha. Even though it would take her much longer, she also dreamed of reaching the top. She greatly appreciated Yoon's achievements in studying the techniques she had developed, but stopping at 1 star would be foolish. We need to move towards achieving 2. Yoon was surprised by this pace, but his aunt explained that the 1st star was just overcoming the Iron Body stage, the easiest one. Kyong Ha asked the young master what he was best at, what his strengths were. After thinking for a moment, he answered, fencing. But his aunt disagreed. This surprised Yoon, as he didn't remember showing her his fencing skills. However, Kyong Ha admitted that sometimes when she was bored, she would secretly watch him, and she believed that he had a much more outstanding ability than swordsmanship. In her opinion, his real power lay in mana control, which greatly surprised the boy. In his past life, he was laughed at precisely because he was a complete zero in mana management. But Kyung Ha was sure that this was his calling, and that getting a second star would not be difficult for him. Besides, with his skills, the naming ceremony will be a cakewalk for him. Now it's time to teach the young man real techniques that require special attention. Yoon was mentally prepared and was looking forward to learning what new techniques awaited him. Kyung Ha also brought a box with her, which interested the boy. The aunt decided not to tell right away, but to show what was in the box. Suddenly, an object flew past Yoon, lightly grazing his face. It was a metal ball thrown by Kyung Ha. The box contained metal cores designed to train mana control while moving. After all, standing still is almost useless. It is much more important to be able to control mana while moving. Yoon realized that training would take on a new charm and would be different from before. All this was necessary in preparation for the naming ceremony, where he was to show his best side. The second stage of the test has arrived, which will be conducted by the leader of the Blood Tiger Squad, Lee Jong-kwon. His first task was to choose the weapon that the heirs would use. He was given exactly 1 minute to do this. Right at the beginning, a small conflict arose between Hwa and Yoon. The boy felt that his sister was looking at him suspiciously. Hwa was simply curious about what weapon her brother would choose. She was sure it would be a sword. But the young gentleman armed himself with a whole arsenal, not limiting himself to just a sword. Jong-kwon didn't quite understand why the boy needed so many weapons, since he only needed to choose the one he wielded best. However, Yoon replied that he was proficient in all of these weapons. The teacher regarded this decision as stupidity rather than the boy's potential. But now is not the time for talking. It is time to begin training, so both heirs should listen more carefully. Although Jong-kwon said that he would teach them martial arts, these would not be the usual stances and techniques. During these trainings, they will learn secret knowledge about techniques called enlightenment. Since they are already familiar with the basics, it is time to learn secret techniques because a sixth sense is hidden in their blood, and now they have to try to awaken it. The sooner they do this, the better it will be for them. Hwa didn't understand what exactly the teacher was going to do, so she wanted to enlist the help of her younger brother, but he only advised her to get ready. And suddenly the teacher was right in front of Yoon's nose. The boy didn't even think that Jong-kwon would start attacking so sharply. He didn't even have time to properly react to block the blow. Although he managed to block, the blow was still too strong, and the block did not save him. But this surprised the teacher. The boy still managed to put the block down at the very last moment. Yet Yoon had no intention of giving up. He wanted to show everything he was capable of. After all, in his past life he couldn't withstand these trainings, but this time everything will be different. However, his attempts were unsuccessful. The difference in strength between him and the teacher was colossal. The same thing happened to Hwa. She also couldn't even get close to Jong-kwon. A month has already passed since the day they began training under his leadership. The training was tough. They suffered fractures and internal organ damage. This isn't something that usually happens to 10-year-olds, but Yoon was no ordinary child. He was the heir to the great Lee clan. During training, Yoon and Hwa often lost consciousness. In fact, Yoon even kept track. He lost consciousness 16 times, while Hwa lost consciousness 22. Jong-kwon noticed the peculiarities of the heirs. The eighth heiress had high endurance. She did not receive serious injuries even after excessive exertion. Yoon, however, was very different from her. At first, the teacher took him for a fool, as he brought several weapons at once, but this turned out to be a mistake. As it turns out, he really does have an equal command of both. It seemed that Yoon was already beginning to figure out how to awaken his sixth sense. Despite the exhaustion, the training continued at the usual pace. But Yoon understood that it was time to do something, and suggested that Hwa join forces. On his signal, they were to hold the teacher back with a block. The girl's pride prevented her from listening to her younger brother, much less helping him. But after thinking for a while, she put aside her grievances and agreed to join forces. After this, Hwa immediately rushed into attack. All she needed was to try to restrain the teacher. Meanwhile, Yoon was behind her, waiting for the right moment to attack and to distract her attention. After all, he couldn't cope alone, but together they had a chance. The teacher was surprised that after so much time they decided to work as a team. Perhaps they might even succeed. After the spear attack, Yoon successfully repelled the teacher's next attack. But Jongkwon had no intention of stopping and went into an active phase of attack. Now the teacher's full attention was focused on Yoona, which allowed Hwa to attack from an ambush. Understanding this, Yoon signaled to his sister. Her time had come. Hwa suddenly jumped out and blocked the teacher's attack with her sword, buying Yoon a few precious seconds. Meanwhile, Yoon changed his spear to a sword and prepared to attack from behind. To increase his chances of success, he filled the sword with mana. Now he could deliver a powerful blow thanks to the limitless technique. Cutting Demon. Jongkwon's full attention was focused on Hwa, and he lost sight of Yoon. However, such tricks are not so easy to pull off against a martial artist of such level. But the sword attack was a feint. The true target was a punch. Yoon filled his fist with mana and struck with all his might, but Jongkwon managed to block the blow. The boy already thought he had won, but looking up, he saw how his tiny fist was clenched in the teacher's massive palm. And just a second later there was a counterattack, which Yoon was unable to repel. Nevertheless, the teacher appreciated the boy's resourcefulness and acknowledged his efforts. 37 days. That's how long it took Yoon to awaken his sixth sense, for which Jongkwon congratulated him. However, we cannot stop there. There are still many challenges ahead. On that note, the training ended. Yoon awakened his sixth sense, and Hwa continued training. And yet, Yoon's blow left a mark even on the teacher, despite the fact that he used mana, although the rules forbade it. Jongkwon was sure that the boy would be good. He understood what combat tactics were, and his older brothers should be wary of him. On the 47th day, Hwa's sixth sense also awakened, after which Jongkwon completed his training. Now they had time to rest and reflect on the knowledge they had gained. At this time, Yoon was visited by his older brother Myungjun, their first face-to-face meeting. Myungjun was Tae Shin's first son, a double-star title holder and second-ranking martial artist and magician. He was both respected and feared. But for Yoon, he was the only beloved brother. Myungjun apologized for not being able to pay attention to Yoon earlier. It was all because of the clan's affairs. He was pleasantly surprised that Yoon recognized him immediately, despite the fact that he was seeing him for the first time. The young man replied that although they were half-brothers, he could not help but know what his older brother looked like. However, Myungjun didn't like that Yoon called himself his half-brother. For him, he was a full-fledged member of the family. And yet Yoon was strict with himself and tried not to allow himself anything unnecessary. Myungjun asked to dispense with formalities. After all, they were brothers. In honor of their first meeting, he brought Yoon a gift he bought in France when he was studying at the Eiffel College of Magic. It was a miracle medicine called the Nectar of the Gods, which would be of more use to Yoon than to himself. This nectar was the most expensive healing potion, and the magicians of France produced only half a liter of it per year. Myungjun was surprised by Yoon's reaction, because he was different from the others. Others saw him as nothing more than a rival, so he expected the same reaction. And yet he was glad that he was not mistaken. His younger brother really was different from the others. However, Yoon stated that he still saw him as a rival. After all, they were both heirs of the clan, and competition between them was inevitable. Who knows, maybe Yoon will grow up to become his strongest rival. Myungjun was glad to hear this. Yoon was the only one who treated him with a smile, even despite the struggle for the inheritance. Therefore, he did not object to such rivalry. A few days later, it was time for the final stage of the naming ceremony of the venerable Lee clan. It was supposed to take place on the Red Blue Island, known for its soil that changes depending on the concentration of mana. Since ancient times, this is where the Lee clan's ceremonies have been held. And now, it is Yoon's time to prove himself. In the final stage, the heirs had to survive on the island for 3 weeks. This was supposed to demonstrate their resilience. To ensure they can be rescued in case of danger, each person will be given tracking devices, which are best left unattended. After 3 weeks, the stage will be completed and they will be picked up. They should take this test seriously because it would sum up their preparation. Having landed on the island, the young lady wanted to tell her younger brother something important. Yoon replied that he had understood everything long ago, deciding that she had finally recognized his strength. But Hwa had something completely different in mind, something that was also connected to their rivalry. She gestured for him to hide the watch and put it in his pocket, and then she shows him the poison, sleepy darkness that her mother gave her to use against Yoon. The young man was surprised to see him because he expected something completely different from her. Hwa continued, explaining that the poison only works on children under 15, and that if the bottle is left open for 5 minutes, it will completely evaporate. The poison also permanently deprives a person of the ability to use mana. Yun wondered where Hua got this poison from, but he received no answer. And at that very moment, she smashes the bottle against the stone without any hesitation. With this act, she wanted to show her younger brother that she was not going to cheat in their rivalry. She intended to overcome him fairly, without any tricks, and therefore would not poison him. Yun was surprised by this development of events and his older sister's determination. From that moment on, he decided to take their rivalry more seriously, just like Hua. First, he needed to get used to the island. Hua asked him to be careful, which Yun interpreted as concern, but his sister immediately denied it, sparking a brief argument between them. They were interrupted by loud sounds coming from the depths of the island, probably from monsters. So standing still was dangerous. It was time to explore the island and look for shelter. Hua decided to start from the coast, without going deeper into the island. Yun intended to go straight to the very heart of the island and set up his refuge there. Meanwhile, Hua was already fighting monsters, successfully completing her first task, hunting. Their actions were observed by the upper echelons of the Li clan, and most of them were betting on her. The clan elder openly supported the 8th heiress, extolling her as if she were a deity, claiming that she was born to succeed. Zhongquan also acknowledged her progress, although he had previously thought that it would take her at least 2 months to awaken. Although Hua was gifted, there was nothing supernatural about her, but someone was able to motivate her greatly. This someone turned out to be Yun, who aroused the teacher's particular interest. Since the elder made Wu his favorite, he despised Yun in every possible way. While Hua was fighting the monsters, Yun was peacefully looking for a safe place, for which Chol Jun contemptuously nicknamed him a rat. However, the elder brother and deputy head of the Myungjung clan objected, believing that finding a safe place under such conditions was a sign of foresight. The other elders merely chuckled, noting that their expectations had been raised due to the 8th heiress's success. But the chief elder continued to criticize Yun, considering him an unworthy member of the Li clan. Myungjun didn't share that opinion, thinking bitterly about how low their clan had fallen if they mocked a child because of his origins. However, now was not the time to think about that. Yun's actions were of far greater interest, and he wasn't the only one who was worried about the boy. Tai Hong was worried about him too. By this time, Yun had already found a suitable place to take refuge. First, he made a fire, which served not only as a source of heat, but also as a place for making medicine. It was also important to hide the camp well from prying eyes, but soon something strange began to happen, which the chief elder immediately noticed. Yun removed the watch that tracked his location and activities. Then he took off the medallion, placed it on the leaves, and went for another batch. The young man carefully covered everything with leaves so that no one could see what he was doing. This caused a storm of reactions among the onlookers. Zhongquang simply chuckled, calling Yun unpredictable, while Myungjun and Tai Hong were alarmed. But for Yun, it was necessary. Now he could use the limitless without the risk of being noticed. Without surveillance, he could act freely, but there were also downsides, such as difficulty regenerating mana. But one of the problems was to prepare an elixir that would help strengthen mana. To do this, he had to prepare tea from mana leaves, which looked rather dubious. In his past life, he didn't have money even for the simplest elixir. But it's good that he learned a thing or two from his herbalist aunt. Kyong Ha taught him how to make tea from mana leaves, as they were abundant on the island, and the drink increased his energy potential. Following her instructions, Yun brewed this miracle tea, although he was wary of it. His fears were confirmed. The tea turned out to be simply disgusting, and so began his 3-week struggle for survival. 17 days had passed since the beginning of the final stage of the naming ceremony, and the young heirs had already settled into life on the island. But something disturbing was happening in Myungjun's office. One of his subordinates, judging by the expression on his face, brought bad news. It was Yu Changhong, deputy captain of the Chonggam detachment, reporting directly to Myungjung. He reported a large group crossing the border into the Republic of Korea. He also noted that he'd been watching them, expecting trouble, but so far they'd remained quiet. The problem was, they were only 2 days' journey from the Li clan's mana stone mines. Myungjun suggested that, as a rule, such gangs only attack poorly defended villages and act according to a plan. Chang Ho added that perhaps they are not just wanderers, but frontmen with serious power behind them. It has also become known that the Kowloon group is gathering forces in the northern borderlands, often provoking the Li clan. Most likely, information about the temporary absence of the clan leader has leaked, and now is the best time to attack. Myungjun asked if the intelligence officers had any details, But Kyong Ha replied that only they knew for now. He thanked him for his work and told him to pass the information on to the scouts and work together to find out more. After all, this was clearly not just a raid by bandits which caused serious concerns. Meanwhile, a secret teleporter was activated on the island at night. Someone had entered the island unnoticed, and this someone clearly came with ill intentions, knowing about the presence of the heirs of the Lee clan. However, for some reason, his target was Yun, whom he planned to kill within 2 days. Meanwhile, Yun continued to fight for survival, battling the Draco, a 7th-rank monster from the dragon family. It required tremendous strength, concentration, and endurance from him. But he had no choice. In addition, the dragons spewed fire, burning everything in their path. Yun needed to dodge their attacks as quickly as possible to avoid being burned alive. The moment the monster lost sight of him, he launched a counterattack. Using the Limitless and the Demon Slicer technique, his most powerful technique at the time, he easily defeated the dragons. It wasn't hard for him to kill them now, but if he had encountered them in his first days on the island, there would have been nothing left of him. On the 19th day of his stay on the island, he discovered the dragon's lair in the very center of the red-blue island, but it was pointless to stay there for long. However, something caught his attention. Yun noticed strange creatures appearing in the center of the island. These were 8th-rank reptilians, stronger than the dragons. They usually live closer to the shore and do not enter the center of the island. Moreover, when Yun tried to attack them, they ran away, which meant that someone was controlling them. Yun decided to use them to find the real enemy. One case would not have been enough, but such situations became more and more frequent. They were controlled by the same stranger who entered the island through the teleport. His goal was to lure Yun into a trap when he would rush in pursuit of the reptilians. The stranger turned out to be Nishiyama Shogo, a monster tamer who accepted the contract to kill Yun. He was confident of successfully completing the task because he had a secret means with him that would eliminate failure. At this moment, Yun was already sitting on the tree watching him, because he guessed that this was all a trap. And yet he didn't understand how an outsider could get here, since this would require someone to first set up a teleportation magic circle here. This, in turn, meant that it was orchestrated by someone from the Lee clan. The sensible thing to do would be to report it and wait for reinforcements, but Yun removes the tracking medallion and hides it. Moreover, help will not arrive soon, so he decides to deal with the situation himself, using stealth techniques. Hiding his presence, the young man decides to attack the tamer unnoticed, and do it faster than he can react. But at the moment of attack, the tamer notices him with the help of his familiar. Yun surprised Shogo. He didn't expect that the illegitimate son of the Lee clan would be so strong. In response, the boy says that Shogo is more likely a weakling. These words catch the tamer off guard, and he orders the reptilians to kill the boy. The young master uses the 7-star sword. Using the 3rd move, he easily deals with monsters. But suddenly he notices that something is wrong, as if his body is bound by some invisible magical force. And it was true. Shogo had paralyzed him with magic, setting a trap right where Yun was heading. The tamer was happy. He had managed to lure the young man into a trap, and now there was very little left to do. He used a circle of supreme magic that blocked the heart's mana center, and now Yun was powerless against it. But Shogo didn't yet know that Yun had a completely different mana control technique, where the center was not the heart. By channeling mana throughout his body, Yun manages to escape the trap using explosive magic. He immediately appears in front of Shogo, who is perplexed and does not understand how the boy managed to escape. Now Yun is in a better position than his opponent. Shogo didn't understand how the young man got out of the circle. He wanted to know about it, but Yun didn't tell him anything. However, for Shogo this no longer mattered. He had another plan. Suddenly, something strange started happening nearby, which made Yun feel uneasy. Suddenly, a giant foot appears in front of him and throws him back with a powerful blow. The blow was so strong that the young man was saved by a tree standing behind him, to which he literally stuck like a magnet. An incredible and unknown force weakened him so much that he could hardly move. But one way or another, he had to continue the fight to survive. Even though the island's guardian, the mountain turtle, stood before him, possessing incredible strength. She was no ordinary monster but a 3rd-rank creature, and the young man did not understand how a 3rd-rate tamer could subdue her. And it was indeed so. Shogo had not completely subdued her, but the turtle could cope with simple orders like, kill him. So he leaves them alone and runs off wherever his eyes lead him. Yun needs to calm down and think. If the turtle is not under complete control, all he needs to do is kill the tamer. To survive, he will need an extreme elixir, which he has prepared just for such an occasion. This elixir gives a huge boost of energy, but its side effects are extremely dangerous. It gives the body stability and also increases the mana reserve for a short time. Along with the elixir, he plans to use the technique that Kyong Ha taught him in case of extreme danger. The Heaven's Denial technique is a powerful move that can inflict significant damage on an enemy. But even with her against the turtle, Yoon only managed to stop her for a short time. However, the young man also possessed other techniques capable of harming even such a powerful opponent. He is going to use one of them. But the turtle also attacks back, using its most terrifying move, a blood-curdling roar. The young man must dodge this attack at any cost, otherwise it will all be over. The turtle also emits waves of mana that immobilize the enemy. But thanks to this, the young master's dark energy resists the terrifying roar. Now he can move again, and therefore attack. For his main attack, he needs the limitless more than ever. Using his sword, he uses his first move and special technique, Demon Slasher. He manages to hit the turtle and repel its attack. The turtle releases a huge stream of energy force into the sky without hitting the young man. But the dark energy has side effects. Because of it, and the technique Denial of Heaven, he loses his strength for a time. Before he loses consciousness, he has 10 seconds to find his handler. Suddenly, he notices a thread underneath him leading in a strange direction. She leads him deep into the forest. Perhaps this is Shogo's trail. And Yoon turns out to be right. Due to his carelessness, Shogo reveals his location. He doesn't even have time to understand what's happening when a young man with a sword appears in front of him. Yoon put all his strength and fury into this attack to get Shogo. And he succeeds. With a powerful blow, he seriously wounds the enemy. After this, he urgently needs to regain his strength so as not to lose consciousness. He uses a powerful nectar that his older brother gave him. But still, the body was too exhausted, and the boy lost consciousness. Opening his eyes, he notices that he is in some strange place where everything is white. Yoon began to wonder, could Shogo really be involved in this? His body felt like it was being torn apart, but that wasn't the worst part. In this white room, there was not only him, but also another unknown creature. It said something about a dangerous creature that was in the boy's body. It hoped that Yoon wouldn't wake up. That would be better for her. Suddenly, it gives him a purple honeycomb, saying that it is not for Yoon, but for him, and that this is the beginning of a new era. Out of the corner of his eye, Yoon notices the silhouette of a mountain turtle. It was probably this unknown creature. But soon, the turtle leaves, saying only that the boy needs to grow up so that the new era does not swallow him up. Hwa finds him unconscious and is surprised by her brother's condition. Yoon was also surprised to see her. He certainly didn't expect this. Using a mana control technique, he inspects his body. Despite the terrible damage, his mana accumulation potential has increased many times over. Hwa was shocked by her brother's condition, especially since he spoke about it in a very calm tone. Yoon felt ashamed that he had obtained the purple twilight stone, which contained honeycombs inside that increased strength, mana, and immunity to poisons and curses. This is exactly why he came to the Red-Blue Island, but the feeling of guilt still remained. And then suddenly their older brother Myung-jung finds them. He came running here after learning about what had happened and took with him a mana potion for restoration. It was painful for Myung-jung to look at his exhausted brother. He asked Hwa to leave them alone, and she left without objection. Myung-jung decided to be frank. If Yoon had died, he would have spent his whole life eliminating those responsible. He also praised the boy. What he did was incredible even by the standards of the Lee clan. But as a brother, he did not approve of such actions. Yoon only replied that he didn't know that everything would turn out exactly this way. Otherwise, he would have waited for his older brother. Myung-jung was glad to hear this. At least sometimes Yoon could appreciate his own strength. Yoon asked to tell him more about the tamer, because he had the right to know. Myung-jung expected this question, although he hoped otherwise. Shogo was a former 5th-rank exorcist from Japan, a member of the Onmyoryo order, from which he was excommunicated for practicing forbidden magic. Whoever hired him apparently came to the island, waited until the Turtle Mountain fell asleep, and cast a circle of dark magic to make it look like the turtle had killed the boy. But they haven't been able to find the customer yet, and considering that Shogo is dying, it will be difficult to find out anything from him. Yoon believes that the target was most likely Myung-jung, not him. In that case, people would start saying he failed to notice a traitor in the clan and take appropriate action in time. And this would greatly damage his reputation in the Lee family and clan. Myung-jung agreed with Yoon and did not try to convince him otherwise, claiming that everything was fine. He only said that a few scratches on his reputation wouldn't hurt him much. But in any case, he can't leave the estate for long, so he must return. Before leaving, Yoon offered to make a small deal. Yoon will witness that the elder brother knew from the very beginning who the traitor was and wanted to expose him, and the young master acted on his orders. This way, they will create the impression that the deputy knew something that even intelligence did not notice. Myung-joon thought that it would be better for his younger brother if everyone knew the truth. But he denies it because he would only be hated and looked down upon even more. In exchange, he wants permission to access the library for just 3 days. The elder brother did not object and agreed to his adventure. All Myung-joon was interested in was whether he was right in thinking that Yoon had gotten out of this situation without him. But their conversation is interrupted by a call from the Chong department, so he needs to immediately return to the estate. Before leaving, he returns the limitless to Yoon, which he dropped when he lost consciousness, and he promises to pretend that he didn't see this sword, and Yoon in response calls him a dangerous opponent. Myung-joon went back to the estate, and Hwa returned to Yoon. She wondered which room Yoon would be sent to. 3 weeks had already passed, and the rooms with the final test were supposed to be open. She proudly replied that she would go to the most difficult one, the obsession room. Yoon decided that he would go to the room of internal struggle. Hwa didn't remember such a room, but it seemed to be one of those located near the shore. This decision disappointed her, because she thought that the further the room was from the center of the island, the easier it would be. She mistakenly believed that the difficulty of the test depended on the location of the room. But the young man didn't care, because it didn't change his decision. At this time, Yoon went to look for a room, and finding it was not so easy. In his past life, he found her here completely by accident, and now he managed to stumble upon it again, a room of internal struggle. Going there without a light source would be a big mistake. You could not only get lost, but also get into trouble. Although at first it seems that the cave contains an ordinary wall, a dead end, this is a deceptive impression. Behind this wall there was something special, hidden from human eyes. Behind it was a door that opened into the room. But finding the door is not enough. To open it, you need to shed some of your blood. Then the door will open, and the heir will be able to begin the test. In the center of the room, which resembled a palace, a sword was stuck. Finally, the young gentleman opened the door and was ready to complete the final test. To begin the test, you must spill a little of your blood into the bowl next to the sword and say, "A warrior of the Lee clan has come to undergo the test of the ancestors. I ask permission." The inner struggle room offers a challenge that appears simple, but in practice turns out to be extremely difficult. To pass the test, you must defeat yourself in combat. There can be as many attempts as you like, but the ultimate goal is victory. Leaving the room will be impossible until the warrior achieves victory. Even simply surrendering won't help. And now, the moment has come when all the strength and intelligence of the young master will be required, and it won't be as simple as it seemed to him at first glance. The clone instantly attacked him and tore his head off his shoulders. The young man didn't even understand what had happened, how he had died so quickly. There was illusion magic in the room, so it was impossible to truly die here, but you could get scared. But for Yoon, what was much more important was how his exact copy was able to do it. The room has full access to the heir's abilities and utilizes them to maximum effect. Yoon didn't know what he was truly capable of, otherwise he would have been able to repel the illusion's attack. But he had no time to think. It was his turn to attack. However, in my head it seemed much simpler than in reality. After each attempt there was a new one, and each time he died differently. It could have been a blow to the stomach, a broken neck, or instant death. Try after try it seemed to go on forever. It was already the 80th attempt, and Yoon seemed to be going crazy. But he didn't want to give up. Instead, he decided to use his greatest strengths, such as the freedom to choose his weapons, complete unpredictability, and his abilities were not limited in any way. This time, the young gentleman was confident that he would succeed. With each battle, with each clash with their own strength, their movements became synchronized. It may take a lot of time and effort, but it will bear fruit. This will be the fruit of his efforts and determination to overcome himself. One day, Yoon will still manage to defeat himself, no matter what, and it seemed that this moment had come. The illusion pierced his stomach with a sword. But this time, Yoon deliberately exposed himself to the attack in order to immediately counterattack. The young warrior used the ancient technique Demon Slicer and dealt with his clone. With this, he passed the test, after which the member of the Lee family is granted an ability hidden in the blood. In his past life, he received a normal ability, Strengthening, but this time he received a new ability, unknown to him. Meanwhile, the clan's highest echelons were already waiting for him at the exit, as the young heir had been slightly delayed in entering the room. Tae Hong thought that the young man would get out of it today, and then the density of the mana began to fluctuate, and the door of the room opened. From it emerged a young gentleman who was able to conquer himself and went through the naming ceremony. But his condition left much to be desired. He was completely exhausted, and as soon as he crossed the threshold, he immediately fell. Tae-hong managed to catch him, very worried to see the boy in such a state. But Yun did not lose consciousness. Through the pain and fatigue, he muttered something. The young man asked for water and food, which was quite natural, considering how much time he spent in the testing room. Tae-hong was glad that the young heir survived and could speak, but at the same time he was angry at him for his irresponsibility. Upon returning home, Yuna was met by his nanny, who was very worried about him because he had gone through so many trials and now he was in such a state. The young man was tired and did not mind taking a shower, and most importantly, eating. Yun was surprised that Kyong Ha wasn't next to him. Gahwa replied that something had happened to her while he was away. Kyong Ha was sent to prison after she tried to confront the clan elder. But even so, she was only interested in how Yun was feeling and how the test went. The young man didn't expect that Kyong Ha was willing to suffer so much for him. She caused a scandal at headquarters, yelling at the clan elder and her older brother. Kyong Ha accused them of deliberately creating all these situations that were supposedly accidents on the island. She apologized to Yun because she thought she would never see him again. Moreover, training with him was especially valuable for her. And when she found out what was happening on the island, she felt as if she was starting to suffocate. At first, Yun didn't trust his aunt, but at some point he began to perceive her as a family member. Therefore, he was grateful to her for the care and attention she showed him. He was determined to get her out of the dungeon, although Kyong Ha was against it, as it could lead to problems. Yun replied that everything was fine. He wouldn't have to do anything. She would be released soon anyway. Meanwhile, the head of the clan, Tae Shin, returned from a secret expedition. He returned just in time for the naming ceremony to conclude. A lot of different situations have happened during his absence, so he has a lot of work ahead of him. He was greeted by every member of the Lee family, without exception. Yun thought that after the ceremony he had become much stronger, but in the presence of his father all this strength faded. The difference between them was like an abyss. As Tae Shin passes by, he says that those who give up easily cannot be members of the Lee clan, but only one person in the crowd looks at him with insolence. The leader did not name the person, so everyone was curious about who he was talking about. The only suspects were his older brother, but only Yun understood that he was the one being talked about. He tried to be more modest, but his father was still perceptive. Meanwhile, the final day of the naming ceremony has arrived. Today, Hua and Yun will receive their names. The Lee clan rarely held such lavish feasts, which also attracted many noble people. These were noble people, from the young master of magic to the master of the Onmyoryo ministry. Yun decided to stand aside, but Choi approached him. The butler told him that Tai Shin wanted to see him and asked him to follow him. The young gentleman began to worry about why his father was calling him and whether he would get into trouble. He was surprised to see Myung-jun also standing next to his father. Looking at them, Yun guessed why his father had called him. His suspicions were confirmed. Tae Shin asked him to come precisely because of the incident on the island. He asked his son to tell him everything that happened at the ceremony, how he met a stranger there, and how Myung-jun told him to arrest him. Tae Shin suspected that this was all Yun's doing, and he didn't deny it. He confessed to offering his older brother a deal, to share the blame for the incident in exchange for 3 days of access to the library. The father replied that only for his exploits on the island he was ready to forgive this crazy adventure. But this time, in the future, there will be no such concessions from him. Myung-jun is also subject to punishment, but after the feast is over. As he left, he smiled at his younger brother so that he wouldn't worry about him. But Yun still realized his guilt before him, and that most likely, his problems were his fault. Tae Shin did not approve of the young man trying to lie to him, but for his exploits he would receive what Myung-jun promised him. Moreover, he found the secret room of internal struggle, and for this, he is also entitled to a reward. The time has come for the final stage of the naming ceremony, which will of course be conducted by the head of the Lee clan. He thanked everyone present and asked the heirs to get ready. The first to receive her name will be the 8th heir and daughter of Hua. The chosen one of the sacred sword, she always illuminates those around her with the light of her spirit. For this, she is given the name So-hyun, which means bright and lucky. So-hyun was grateful for this choice and beamed with joy. Now it was the turn of the 9th heir and son of Yun. Everyone around him reacted to him with disgust, despite his exploits. And yet, it didn't matter, because right now he would receive his name and place in the family. The young man is firm and vigilant, smart and unyielding, like a blacksmith turning a piece of ore into a dangerous weapon. Therefore, there would be no better name for him than Chol, which means iron. Chol chose this name himself because he wanted to be as strong as iron, but now it will take on a new meaning for him. Now he is Lee Chol, and his goal is to become the patriarch of the Lee clan, and he will do everything to worthily inherit his father's place. Meanwhile, Kyong Ha was going wild in the dungeon, as she wasn't even allowed to attend Chol's naming ceremony. Besides, he said he would get her out, but that doesn't seem true. But then the telephone rang, which is usually used to contact the clan's top brass with the guards. And for Kyong Ha, this was good news. She was finally released from behind bars. Her case will be decided later, but for now, she can be freed from custody. Kyong Ha was so happy that in her joy she accidentally kicked down the door to the dungeon. Chol was already waiting for her near the exit and was glad to see her again, not behind bars. He really did help her get out of prison, but at the same time he brought an interesting letter. She was curious about how Chol managed to get her out, but she was also curious about what was in the letter. It was written there that Kyong Ha should receive the powers of the council elder and also be appointed as Cheol's teacher. Kyong Ha was pleasantly surprised by this turn of events, because now Chol is her official student. A lot of time has passed since that day. Chol turned 13 years old, which means it's time for him to enter the Lee clan's cadet school. A new stage had begun in his life on the path to becoming the strongest warrior. From this day on, his cadet life will begin, but it will not be like the life of others. As soon as the young man crossed the threshold of the entrance, all attention immediately fell on him. Everyone was interested in what he would show this time after what he demonstrated at the ceremony, although there were those who attributed his achievements to luck, while So-hyun was treated with respect by everyone, as she was the legitimate heir. But this did not interfere with their relationship. Be that as it may, they are brother and sister, and also rivals in a good way. At the same time, So-hyun wanted to apologize for what she said at the ceremony, that she was disappointed in him, and called him a weakling who wasn't even worth comparing to her. But Chol had already forgotten about her words, so he replied that everything was fine. So-hyun was glad that he didn't hold a grudge against her, but at the same time she said that he was just petty sometimes. She also heard that Kyong Ha had now been appointed as his teacher and that he was allowed to visit the library. But their conversation was interrupted by the teacher's introductory speech. He announced that the participants would now be divided into classes, and when a participant's name was called, he would stand in a straight line opposite his instructor. All the children were nervous. Many wanted to get into the best class to avoid any incidents. This was normal, since a cadet's training lasts 3 years, and the division into classes plays a significant role. Each academic year has 5 classes, and the classes are divided into ranks. So Hyun was placed in first grade without any problems. It was clear as day. And Chol, of course, was assigned to the 5th class, the lowest rank of all. He suspected that this would happen, but he didn't think that they would treat him so openly. The 5th class, or dump, was designated for the mediocre and ignorant, and the selection was made by a council of elders and a coalition of influential relatives on Mrs. Beck's side. Chul took it as a challenge, so he didn't worry, but So Hyun didn't seem happy. She reacted as if she had been sent back to 5th grade and couldn't understand why she wouldn't speak out against such a decision. But Chol replied that everything was fine and she shouldn't worry. The class was truly a dumping ground, filled mostly with spoiled kids who wanted everything at once, simply because of their parents' status. Meanwhile, Chul was approached by an unfamiliar guy who seemed to not have been there in his past life. It was Kim Han, the son of a blacksmith who worked for the respected Lee clan, and it was an honor for him to be in the same class with him. The young gentleman was curious why Khan had decided to meet him. The boy replied that he had heard what the people of the clan had said about him and was truly delighted with him. It didn't seem like a lie, so Chul didn't mind getting along with him. Chol asked Han what he thought about being assigned to the 5th grade. Khan smiled and replied that this meant that this was as far as his skills went. However, he is not going to sit idle and will become better, because who knows what the future holds. Chol was pleasantly surprised by Han's attitude, as they had a similar train of thought. Besides Han, Choi and Ha also wanted to befriend the young heir. It became noisy around. Other children were also thinking about going to make friends with Chol, but for some reason they were afraid. In Ha was like a smile generator among the others. It seemed like he was even sleeping and smiling. The 5th grade instructor, Lee Jun-ho, also came to introduce himself to the students and get to know the newcomers better. Chol remembered him from his previous life. He was just as energetic and optimistic. In the past, he even gave him private lessons when he was behind in his studies. In Ha had been the class president for 2 years, and although he was ashamed to admit it, He had remained in that position for the second year. But now the time has come to elect a new squad leader. Even though they're cadets, they'll be facing real combat missions, so the squad leader is practically the squad leader. The instructor is responsible for the curriculum and classes, but the class monitor is responsible for everything else. To choose the class monitor, it is customary to hold competitions in the 5th grade, the winner of which will become the monitor. The rules were as follows: only physical combat, no magic, and a short break after each match. Of course, there were those who didn't like it, and among them was the young heir Chol. He was dissatisfied with the rules and the way the cadets thought, since this was the Lee clan's martial school. If they want to play school children, let them go to a civil school somewhere in the city. In Ha told him that he was judging them too harshly, since they just wanted to restore order the way they were used to. But Chol insisted on his own and was determined to make real warriors out of the children. He competed with each of them and was able to defeat each of them without any problems. Even though there were a lot of them, it only exhausted Chol. No one was able to seriously harm him. In Ha was amazed at how many Chol was able to defeat on his own. He also realized that he would be the next one to fight against the young heir. The boy was truly excited because he understood that his chances of defeating Chol were almost nil. Chol seemed to be on a completely different level compared to the other students. Yet, In Ha decided to fight the young heir despite his fear. In Ha didn't understand why Chol was going so far, because this was just a competition without awards or honors, like in a regular cadet school, and not some Shaolin. Chol was so exhausted that he could barely hold his sword. But even so, he was not afraid to fight with In Ha. To some extent, he understood the young heir, because before he too had been desperate and wanted victory at any cost. And then I realized that it's also possible to adapt and make concessions. That's what being an adult is, and that's how you can live. But be that as it may, simply wanting to defeat an opponent will not help you defeat him if you don't have enough strength. This was the case with In Ha Chol. He was significantly superior to him in martial arts. Chol landed a powerful blow and appeared to break the young man's wrist. That, he thought, was the end of the competition. But In Ha had a different opinion and wasn't about to give in. Besides his right hand, he also had a left one. However, this didn't help him much because the difference in strength between them didn't disappear. Chol defeated all the students and now he has become the class president. The young heir gave a short speech about how, in order to protect himself and everything he held dear, he must fight tirelessly. Who else had such a life? This is what Chol called a real struggle for life and for himself. After the competition, a teacher approached Chol and told him that this was too much. The children had suffered a number of injuries. But Chol didn't care, because if they wanted to survive in the Lee clan, it had to be a trifle. Junho felt uneasy about the boy's words and the tone in which he spoke. But Chol replied that there were very few good people like the teacher in the clan. Junho is kind, but he shouldn't forget that he works with the cadets of the Lee clan, and if a student goes astray, the teacher must bring him back to the right path. After yesterday, Chol felt pain all over his body. It seemed like he had overdone it. Some of the students looked at him with dread, but no one looked away. And this gave him hope. After yesterday's competition, few people wanted to talk to him. Only insults were directed at him. But there were also those who accepted defeat with dignity, such as Khan. He came early because he didn't want to be late after Chol defeated him. But he also had some questions for the young heir that he wanted to ask. Han wanted to know how he could become as strong as Chol. Chol replied that he was not yet at the level to teach anyone, but noted that Han had good eyesight and reaction time. Yesterday, he managed to dodge his feints 3 times, which means his vision is his strong point. Khan should learn more complex techniques than just brute force. Once he masters them, he'll notice how much he's changed. After yesterday, In Ha, who seemed to have no life left on him, also spoke to Chol. But the young man didn't want to miss class, and then listened to Chol talk about how pathetic and weak he was. Chol was pleasantly surprised to see how the students changed and adapted. Meanwhile, the teacher announced that 5 students simply did not show up, 4 asked to leave, and in the end, there were only 11 people in class. It was painful for Kyong Ha to look at the students' appearance. They were all sleep-deprived and wanted to rest. Moreover, after the arrival of Chol, the atmosphere changed. Ordinary children turned into small, frightened animals as soon as the predator appeared. Today, according to the plan, he was supposed to assess their level, but the student's condition would not allow him to do this. So today's workout will be light. It will just be a test of physical fitness. The other children were surprised by the teacher's decision. Before, he had let them rest, but now he told them to practice. Although the training was planned to be easy, the physical assessment lasted a full 10 hours. But this was only the first part. Next came the lesson in pairs under the guidance of Chol. He introduced himself to the students as the new class monitor, and suddenly someone understood. Previously, the headman was Inha, and as he said yesterday, the headman reports only to the instructor and bears great responsibility. Therefore, training with him will be tough, and those who do not want to work hard can leave. Of course, not everyone liked this, and Kim Bo-sung spoke out against Chol. Chol replied that he was willing to fight anyone who wanted to, and if they could land at least one strong blow, he would take over as headman. But for now, it was best to get back to training. The students split into pairs, but only 6 were strong enough to fight. The rest immediately gave up. The training was hard and exhausting for the students, and after that, their opinion of Chola worsened significantly. They started talking about him behind his back, saying that lessons had become a living hell and that it would be better if he didn't show up. Han stood against them. Although he too was tired and exhausted, no one could even land a blow on Chol. They also asked In-ha's opinion whether he didn't think the same as them, since everything was great last year. But In-ha denies it. Everything was so great that he had to repeat a year. The young man says that if he doesn't change this year, he will remain a pathetic loser for the rest of his life, so he will try to become stronger. He tries to convey to them that Chol is also trying to make real warriors out of them, and not just taking it out on them. In-ha was inspired by the young heir's speech about his struggle. Perhaps this was a chance for him to change for the better. Meanwhile, Chul continued to learn mana manipulation techniques, and this time he tried to transform mana into an object. But again, it didn't work. He couldn't clear the aura. It immediately crumbled. Kyong Ha never thought that such a problem would arise after reaching 3 stars. If she had reliable sources on the ancient uses of mana, she might be able to find a way out. Chul also had problems. He still couldn't read the memories of the Boundless one, and he only managed to find out some things in the library. Black dragons were the terror of ancient Korea. Even monsters feared them. They killed the empire's best generals, and heroes gathered to seal the dragons of Mount Mangwi in the north. For this feat, the emperor gave them lands, and the heroes, inspired by the emperor's generosity, forged a one-of-a-kind sword, Limitless. Chol accidentally found the story of its origin and was very surprised. Meanwhile, Chol had reached the stage of aura formation, and the fact that he was moving towards achieving 3 stars on his own was a miracle. One way or another, they will soon find a way to overcome the obstacle with the crumbly aura. They just need to think about it. Chul was interested in what would happen when he reached 3 stars. Kyong Ha replied that then he would be able to use the Gan-chi technique, magic using aura, but it would take a long time to master it. Kyong Ha, in turn, was interested in how Chol was going with his studies since he was constantly tired lately. She offered to help if needed, but Chol didn't know how she could help. But it seemed that Kyong Ha had already developed a plan to help her beloved nephew. Chol suspected that her idea would be quite strange, but not that strange. Today at the cadet school, there will be a special lecture on mana techniques. It will be conducted by Elder Kyung Ha from the Lee Clan Scientific Institute. Kyung Ha was delighted with this presentation and the warm welcome from the students and teachers. Therefore, she decided not to delay and immediately begin her studies, starting with a lecture. After a boring lecture, she plans to teach the cadets an improved version of the iron line technique developed by the Institute. Junho thought that the lecture was the whole lesson, but Kyung Ha said that now was the most important part of the lesson, so the students should pay more attention. Usually, the direct heirs of the Lee clan receive full support from the family, but this was not the case with Cheol, so Kyung Ha helped him with this. If everything works, his energy potential will double. Junho asked the cadets to pair up to practice mana manipulation techniques. In-ha approached Chul and offered to train together if he didn't mind. In-ha immediately said that he would not give the young heir a head start. Chol didn't mind and was glad to hear it, replying that he wouldn't let him hit him first. Their battle was interesting to watch for all the cadets, including Kyung Ha and Junho. Kyung Ha was proud of the boy and saw herself in him as a child. She overheard other cadets making rude comments about Chol, saying that even though he was illegitimate, he was still higher in status than them, and his performance was much better. They weren't slacking off either, so why are they worse than him? Their complaints are interrupted by Kyung Ha. It was extremely unpleasant for her to hear such things about Chol, because now he was not only her nephew, but also a respected student. The children realized their mistake and apologized for their harsh words towards Chul. But Kyung Ha was still dissatisfied with their behavior, because they knew little about the young man to speak of him like that. Bo Song also decided to voice his opinion. He claimed that they two had worked tirelessly, but were being written off as if they were nobodies. He justified their poor skills by citing the fact that they grew up in different families. But Kyong Ha denies his claims, saying that he doesn't understand everything and is only looking for excuses. After all, few people knew what Chol's life was really like. Compared to this, their life and studies were just kindergarten. But Bo Song still didn't understand how Cheol's life was different from theirs. In his opinion, there really is no difference. The young man constantly talks about the need to fight, but he was simply born different. Therefore, Bo Seong was curious about what the young heir was doing, so he decided to follow him. But the cadets were worried about whether they could wander around the core grounds, but Bo Song convinced them that yes, because Cheol lived in a dormitory for ordinary people, and not for direct heirs. So today, he wanted to prove his case and not let Chol boss him around. Bo Sung and several other children were waiting for Chol near the entrance to the laboratory. Compared to him, they were not full of enthusiasm and wanted to go home as soon as possible because they were very tired after training. So they slowly started to go home, leaving Bo Sun alone. Meanwhile, Chul left the lab and was planning to head home, or so Bo Sung thought. But Chol headed to the training hall for direct heirs to continue training. Loud and violent screams were heard from the hall. The cadets even thought that they were killing him there. Therefore, everyone except Bo Sun decided to stop spying on him, recognizing that the young heir was indeed strong, not just in words. But Bo Song insisted on his own and continued to believe that he and the young master were equals. The other cadets decided to leave, leaving him alone. Bo Song was determined to prove at all costs that he was not mistaken. He continued to pursue him all the way to the barracks. And finally, Chol went to sleep. But then Bo Sun was discovered. He did not expect such an outcome of events. A passing guard found him. He'd gotten used to the young gentleman usually wandering around here every night, but he didn't expect his friend to be with him. But Bo Song said that it wasn't like that. He just went out to relieve himself. But the guard replied that cadets were forbidden to walk around at night, so he should go home. At that moment, a light came on in Chol's room. Bo Sung was surprised, as it was already 2 in the morning. Having accepted his defeat, he went home. That same morning, Bo Sung noticed Cheol at the training field for the direct heirs. He was surprised when he saw the young man, because it was only 5 in the morning. It was clear from his appearance that he was very tired, even if he was born with the best physical qualities. He was surprised how healthy he could be if he slept only 3 or 4 hours a day, while Bo Song, when he came to the barracks, watched TV or played on the console. Chol was also surprised to see him here at such a time. Bo Song asked if he was tired, and the young man understood everything. He suspected that someone was following him yesterday, and it was Bo Song. But Bo Song justifies himself by saying that the young master has received all the support since birth, so he was born different from them. Chol replied that he'd been living like this since early childhood, only occasionally allowing himself a little extra sleep. Naturally, he was tired. Bo Song didn't understand why and for what reason the young man was driving himself so hard. But Chol only answered him that he himself understood everything. Bo Song truly understood everything perfectly, and that the difference in their strength was not due to which family they were born into. Meanwhile, Tae-shin tasked the butler with gathering information about the dungeons, making them the final task in the exam. But it wasn't enough because we were talking about dungeons of the 7th and 8th levels, and they were dangerous for them. Tae-shin needs warriors who can survive in any conditions. Besides this, Choi had one more piece of news related to the 9th heir and his cadetship. Hearing this, Tae-shin was once again convinced that Cheol looked at this world differently, and he recognized the look of a person who knows what it is like to be trampled and deprived of everything. But leading and making people change is a completely different skill. Tae-shin was curious to see if the boy could lead people. Therefore, the head orders the difficulty of the exam to be changed. And besides, the 8th heir is also studying there, so the standards must be raised for everyone. On weekends, no one usually trains, so Junho was surprised when he arrived at the training field. It was still early morning, but the cadets were already training hard and fighting among themselves. The cadets were so surprised by the teacher's arrival because they didn't expect him to come. Junho asked to call the rest of the guys who remained in the barracks. He had a small announcement to make. The teacher announced that it had been decided to hold the midterm exam earlier than scheduled. Therefore, all cadets are given a week off. This will be their last vacation of the year. Junho also wanted to remind them that they needed to maintain their training at least a little during this period, but the cadets' looks said it all. Therefore, he was confident that everyone would pass the exam and wished them good luck. Chol was surprised by the sudden break before the exam. Perhaps this would make the exam even more difficult. Even after the teacher announced the break, the cadets still did not leave the training field, waiting for Chol. The rest were interested in what he would do during the holidays. Chol replied that everyone decides for themselves, so why ask him about it? Besides, they can enjoy their vacation in peace. He won't force them to train during the holidays. The cadets, however, thought the opposite, that the class monitor would force them to train to the point of exhaustion, even during breaks. This slightly surprised Chul. Training is training, but rest is also important, especially before a midterm exam. So Chol, as the headman, told them to rest, and was sure that even after saying this, the children would still not relax much. The week of holidays before the exam began, and the cadets were confident that everyone would be able to pass the exam. Meanwhile, Chol headed to Kyong Ha's lab to continue his research. She heard that his vacation had started, but instead of relaxing, for some reason he came to her when she was already full of work. But Chul replies that when he arrived, she was watching stupid videos on her phone. Kyong Ha says that the videos are not stupid at all, because Ha Min was finally recognized by the chairman and was cured of leukemia. But the young man was interested in something else. Was it true that the exams had been postponed by order of his father? After all, in this case the exam will be more difficult, and the young heir will have to make a breakthrough in mana management. And to do this, he needs to gain access to the memories of the Boundless, which he has not yet succeeded in doing. Next to Chul, there was a stack of papers containing information about the monsters according to the laboratory, and Kyong Ha was working on this. The young man accidentally knocks over the stack and all the papers fall to the floor. Looking at them, he notices something interesting for himself. The main difference between ancient and modern martial arts lies in their purpose. It is theorized that in ancient times, they were primarily intended for fighting monsters. It seems that this is exactly what Chol needed. The Limitless needs a goal. Chol realized that this was it, and rising abruptly, he ran to try out the new theory. He promised to tell Kyong Ha everything later, but now he needs to run and train. Kyong Ha was shocked by what was happening and that her office was now a mess with hundreds of papers scattered around. The first thing Chol needs to do is imagine his opponent, a giant monster, many times stronger than him. It is huge, and the young man needs a technique that is highly effective, a simple blow that cannot be dodged. Aesthetic but effective techniques are not suitable for this purpose. This is the clear purpose of the demon slicing technique. Killing thunder monsters is the main goal of the demon slash technique, and Chol's theory was confirmed. The Limitless opened up a new memory for him. This time, the young heir will be able to reveal the secrets of his sword. Boundless transferred him into his memories, but now it is not a battlefield with a giant monster. It was a training ground, and the environment was different from what it was in the first memory. Chol noticed that there was a person on the training ground whom he had seen somewhere before. He watched him train. His punching speed was simply incredible. Also, every time his weapon changed, his aura changed too. And it wasn't he himself who did this, but the Boundless one. And the young man became even more interested. But then Chol hears another voice. There was more than one person training on the field. Another stranger approached the warrior, who had been spying on his training and was interested in what techniques he had already come up with. The warrior had been training constantly since he received the new sword, but he hadn't yet come up with names for the techniques. They were still in the raw stages of development. Chol came even closer to get a better look at what they were chatting about, but his presence seemed to have been noticed by that same warrior, who thought that someone else had come with the stranger. He replied that he had come alone. At this point, Chol tensed up, not wanting to get into trouble. A sparring session began between the two warriors, and it appeared to be just a friendly fight. But Chol was surprised by such a quick turn of events. The memories of the Limitless never ceased to amaze him. He also noticed a distinctive feature in one of the warriors, his eyes and hair. The eyes were yellow and the hair was black. This was the distinctive feature of the Lee clan. Soon a week of vacation passed, and after it the midterm exam began. The exam will take place far from the normal area, behind a barrier that separates the safe and dangerous zones. Long ago, not far from the Pacific Ocean, a giant crack formed, which was then nicknamed the Blue Hole, an unknown space that had not even been officially properly explored. And from there, monsters of different types and strengths began to appear. For a long time, humanity fought with them and tried to reclaim its territory. However, there were still lands that were not developed. People called these areas unknown or dangerous zones. Cadets are now being sent to one of these zones to take their exams. But there was another peculiarity in the danger zones. The further they were from the barrier, the more deserted the landscapes became, so said Khan. But Chol tells him that they are still inside the barrier. and in settlements near the danger zones, the level of development is significantly behind. Chol knew this better than anyone else because in his past life he had lived there, albeit briefly. A group of cadets arrived at their destination. It was an uncharted dungeon in a dangerous area, so they had to be extremely careful. Kyong Ha gathered everyone and suggested setting up a small camp at this place. They would check the supplies and then begin the test. The escort warriors will only guard the parking lot to prevent the monsters from destroying the bus. Everything else depends solely on the cadets. Their lives are now completely in their hands. But there is no need to worry because if anything happens, the teacher will always provide them with maximum support. From this moment on, command passes into the hands of the class leader, Chol. He immediately told the other children that this exam was much more difficult than the previous ones, in part because of him, so if anyone wanted to leave, it would be better to do it now and quickly. After all, this exam is not just a typical assessment for young guys, but a tricky dungeon called the Forest of Spiders with Human Faces. There are cobwebs everywhere so that the monsters can locate the test subject, and one of the tasks in the exam was to take a photo of a spider with a human face inside the dungeon. Chol was surprised when none of the cadets wanted to leave the exam quickly. The children, on the contrary, were confident in themselves and their abilities and completely trusted the young gentleman. That's why they are ready to fight side by side with Chol and listen to his orders. Chol was glad of this atmosphere and mood of the class. It significantly improved his situation. So there's no point in delaying. And first you need to check the connection and supplies, and then head to the dungeon. Spiders with human faces are extremely cunning and behave like ants or bees. Chol reiterated that their main task was to record the movements of a spider with a human face in a forest that was at least 10 years old. And from that moment on, he hands over his command to Ha. Ha was surprised by his decision because he did not fully understand what the young heir meant. Chol replied that from now on, he would move alone and become bait. These words left the cadets stunned, and for a moment they seemed speechless. They were shocked by his plan and questioned its feasibility. But Chol moved forward, clearing away spiders along the way, of which there were simply tons in the forest. The young man killed them in order to spread danger pheromones so that even more spiders would gather around him, and he succeeded. Now all that was left was to wait for him to be caught, because spiders with human faces bring nutritious prey to their nests and feed the larvae. To become this nutritious prey, one must prove that this prey has tremendous power. Without any ulterior motive, Chol filled his sword with mana and prepared to strike the spiders. He used his most powerful move, the Demon Slash. His actions angered the spiders, and within a second there were more than 100 of them above him, and they all instantly rushed at the young man, taking him for very valuable prey. This was Chol's plan, which is why he went alone. The young man lost consciousness, and when he woke up, he found himself in an unknown place. Chol found himself inside the cocoon. Everything was as he planned. His plan worked. His stomach is slightly bloated from the spider venom, but otherwise his body feels fine, and he decides to hide his presence using technology. Having escaped from the web, Chol began to think, if this is a nest, then there must be a larva here. Having cut the cocoon a little, he saw that his suspicions were confirmed. There were a lot of cocoons around. It would have been simply impossible to catch and hide so many in a day. This surprised Chol, who should have eaten them long ago, so why were they still there? But he soon saw an explanation. In the center was a giant cocoon, which was significantly different in size from the others. Suddenly it began to pulsate sharply, as if someone was about to crawl out. It resonated with the dark energy that was inside Chol. And then the wall of the cocoon tore open, and someone began to slowly appear, seemingly saying something. Inside the cocoon was a spider queen with a human face, which was a level 5 monster. Chol was surprised that a 6th level monster in the dungeon could speak human language. But no, she didn't open her mouth, which meant that dark energy could read minds. While Chol was thinking, the queen suddenly attacked him, destroying his cocoon. The young man no longer had room to maintain his stealth technique. The queen was unhappy with the boy's presence in her dungeon. She said that she was awakened by what was inside the boy. This made her even more furious, and she wanted to kill the boy as soon as possible. The monster began to make a piercing sound that only a high-level predator could make. But fortunately for Chol, this no longer had any effect on him thanks to the suppression of the enemy's mana. The queen didn't understand how he was able to suppress her mana, and this made her even more furious. Meanwhile, something strange was happening in the forest. Smoke appeared. A small part of the forest was blown up by magical explosive shells, and soon the fire began to spread throughout the entire forest. The Spider Queen was furious. The forest, which had been peaceful for decades, was now burning in flames. Chol was glad that his plan worked, and the other cadets were able to set the forest on fire. While Chol was in the very nest of the dungeon, at his signal the cadets set fire to the trees, and soon they began to move towards the nest. In half an hour they will be there to help the young gentleman. All this time, information was provided to them by Kyong Ha, who was at the camp base. The queen was furious to see how some boy had fooled her. She ordered the remaining spiders to protect the forest from fire. She will deal with the boy herself, without their help. The queen was furious that she could not be defeated by a child of the human race, and did not understand why he was so confident that his friends would have time to reach him. She was sure that Chol couldn't do anything to her, but the young master replied that she shouldn't underestimate him. It was time for Chol to show off everything he had learned over the years, as well as the ability he had acquired after the ceremony. Meanwhile, the cadets continued to run, some of them continuing to detonate shells to lure the spiders, while others were providing an escape route. Bo Sung was a little unsure if they could just break into the nest since something seemed to have happened there, but In Ha assured him that they were proceeding according to plan. The forest continued to burn at an incredible speed, and flames raged around the nest. The queen continued to attack Chul, but he continued to hold on, ignoring her attacks. The young man continued to maintain his concentration and simply looked at the monster. It's all about the demon eyes. They allow one to see the hidden flow of numerous forces and help avoid fatal injuries. But there were difficulties. Due to the gap in strength, he was unable to completely evade her attacks. Luckily, the queen had just hatched and therefore did not have full control over her body, which allowed the young man to occasionally heal himself. But he had only one chance, one try, to defeat the queen. To do this, he used the Manbian sword and the movement of endless change. And using the technique Procation Chi, he delivered a powerful lightning strike to the queen's body. There was a huge flash at the site of the impact, and it seemed that after that there was nothing left of the monster. Perhaps that would have been the case if Chol had managed to hit deeper. As he thought, it would not be possible to cut such thick skin with one blow. The queen was perplexed and furious at the youth's insolence. She wanted to take what was inside him, restore his body, and make him suffer forever. Anger and pain from the damage inflicted overwhelmed her, and she began to attack Chul. The young man could no longer use demon eyes to evade her magical threads. One of them grabbed him by the hair, and the queen used the submission technique. After that, his mind began to go crazy, and in his head he only heard, "Submit." She began to laugh and rejoice at her victory, looking at the weakened young man. But suddenly something strange started happening to her too. She didn't understand what had happened. Why her body began to hurt so suddenly. The queen was in unbearable pain, and in front of her stood a young man who had managed to break her thread. He used the last of his strength to use demon eyes and repel her attacks, but it was no longer necessary. During this time, the fire reached the nest and began to burn the queen's body, since spiders and insects are extremely vulnerable to fire. Meanwhile, a group of cadets had already run up to the young gentleman to pull him out of the nest. They apologized for being late, to which Chol jokingly replied that it looked like they would have to go through some special training when they returned home. The fire was spreading at an incredible speed, so it was necessary to leave the nest and the forest as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, most of the classes had already taken the exam, and only the 5th class was late, although someone reported that they had returned half an hour ago. Some began to think that they had already abandoned their assignment like the 4th grade did, but then Kyong Ha arrived. He apologized for being late, explaining that several cadets had been injured and needed to be taken to hospital, but that he was now ready to give a report. The 5th grade assignment was to catch an adult spider with a human face in the forest, but during the assignment, an unusual phenomenon occurred and information needed to be gathered for preparation. The 5th class entered the dungeon and split into 4 groups, releasing 132 magic projectiles, and another 52 projectiles were used when clashing with monsters. This angered one of the teachers, as the original mission was to photograph the anomalous phenomenon, not to burn down the forest. Was Junho really trying to pass off this bombing as a successful mission? But Kyong Ha didn't understand the indignation of one of the teachers because the task was completed. Soon, Chul joined them, bringing a video and apologizing for being late. He explained that the original recording had been damaged, and this was all that could be recovered. Junho was surprised when the young man brought a video of the task being completed. So Hyun was also surprised by the 5th class's actions, since blowing up the dungeon and climbing into the nest was not at all necessary. But Chul replied that this was the most reliable method. After watching the video, one of the teachers admitted it was all true. and that using projectiles was like bringing a can of oil into a burning house. Could this plan really have been the right one? Chol replied that he simply acted in the most efficient way, and the standard approach would hardly have been able to cope. The teacher noted that this wasn't an accident, even though it looked like one, but rather part of a plan. Chol knew exactly what he was doing and what the outcome would be. The other teachers also noted that the young master's plan was so radical that it was difficult to compare it to anything else. It was difficult to evaluate this, but since there were no casualties, everything is fine. Only the 5th grade received a perfect score this quarter. The examination completion report was also submitted to the office of the head of the Lee family. 32 people died and 78 were injured during the exam, but no problems arose because the contract contained a disclaimer of liability. Victims are guaranteed full compensation for medical expenses. Choi also provided Tae-shin with complete information about every dungeon he had managed to explore. The clan leader was surprised when he watched the video of the 5th grade test, noticing some oddities in it. The Spider Forest is a dangerous underground dungeon located at the northern tip of Gangwon Province. The video mostly showed a spider with a human face. Choi also informed the gentleman that the video had been restored, but it appeared to have simply been edited. Tae-shin agreed with the butler's opinion and was sure that this was the work of the 9th heir. The gentleman asked Choi what he thought about it. The butler replied that it was a great achievement to have mastered such a complex task with his mind, but he was concerned that the young man had not used a standard strategy. Tae-shin also noticed this, so he asked Choi what he thought about it and whether he had noticed these oddities. Going beyond the boundaries and being unconventional, these things show a boy's courage, and creating something new is only possible thanks to well-learned strategic standards. The fact that not only the cadets but also the teacher followed this plan without objection confirms the leadership qualities of the youngest son. After this, Tae-shin gave the order to increase the difficulty of the assessment level, including this one. Gradually, other children will begin to pay attention to the younger one. A few months later, the exclusive training ground of the 5th class of the Cadet Corps. Yesterday, the young cadets returned from their final assessment for the year. That's why Chol gave the children a little break. The last assessment for this year is over and everyone wants to relax. But don't forget that there is still a promotion exam ahead, and Chol won't let anyone in the class fail him. Therefore, training continues. And today it is worth starting with physical training. Chol was pleased to see the cadets growing stronger not only physically but also mentally. Instead of being upset by their shortcomings, they learned to compensate for them. During training, the young master was visited by teacher Kyong Ha. He informed him that there would be an announcement regarding the promotion exam soon, so he needed to be present there. Entering the office, Chol immediately noticed that someone was calling him. So Hyun was already sitting there and asked him to come to her. There was an empty seat next to her, and she wanted to talk to her younger brother about something. She noted that the 5th grade did quite well on the exams, and Chol also noted that the 1st grade did no worse. So Hyun took his words as praise and replied that it was true. They did well on the exam. And then she started saying that she didn't ask to be praised. So Hyun also told him that the upcoming exam was a real headache. Recently, the 6th sister and 7th brother were called into their mother's room, after which a rumor spread that they were both dating cadets. Chol asked if they were trying to knock him out of the promotion race. So Hyun continued that, of course, it wasn't allowed, but that's what made it scarier because you didn't know what to expect, and called Chol weird. But Chol replied that if she wanted to warn him, it was already too late, since the problems had started from the very first assessment. There were cases where they were either provided with inferior equipment or someone deliberately omitted educational material, creating discrimination. Chol also heard that someone recently approached Bo Seong. So Hyun told Chol that this time, she and her class were going to compete fairly with him and win, and also get a higher grade than him and make Chol call her big sister. But Chol didn't care, because he didn't understand why So Hyun was so fixated on this. Meanwhile, the teacher entered the office to make an important announcement. He reported that this year's assessment has now been completed and will now share details and a schedule for promoting cadets this year. The cadets' promotion results will be determined by the results of their year-long evaluations and examinations, and this examination will be held at the Y7 gate, located approximately 3 kilometers north of Kaesong. Chol was surprised that the exam would be held at the gate. He expected the promotion exam to be different, but not like this. The teacher continued that nameplates would be located inside the gates, and the cadets would also have nameplates. Losing one's nameplate would be considered a failure and death. There were no other rules, The main goal was to collect as many nameplates as possible. Chol understood the main goal of the exam. All you need to do is get nameplates, steal, and survive. If you lose yours, you're dead. The number of nameplates determines the exam result. But being considered dead is also a trap. Even if someone steals the nameplate, no one outside will know about it. So all you need to do is steal someone else's name tag or get your hands on a hidden one. Plus, second-year students will be present at the exam. The exam is isolated from the outside world, so no matter what happens to the illegitimate child, there will be no evidence left. This is a great opportunity to get rid of Chol, but also a good chance for him. Meanwhile, some family members were also preparing for the exam, but in their own way, like the seventh child of the Lee clan, Lee Jae-hak, and also the sixth child of the Lee family, Lee Sol-ah, who had a very bad character. She treated all family members, including So-hyun, with disdain, disliking her for her own reasons. Sol-ah was curious about what Jae-hak thought about his mother's orders regarding his younger brother. Jae-hak noted that this was a great opportunity to test his younger brother. Sol-ah hated Chol because he was a bastard, although he had the title of a direct descendant. So she, as an older sister, should teach him a couple of lessons and put him in his place. The rank promotion exam is mandatory for moving up to the next class and is currently being held as part of the nameplate hunt at the gates. Han told Chol that the gates were heavily guarded. Chol replied that it was for the people's peace of mind, or perhaps a precaution due to experiments and investigations. Moreover, there were far fewer people at the exam than Chol had expected. The others mocked Chol, considering him inferior to themselves. But for the young gentleman, it didn't matter, because one day he would be able to prove to everyone who he really was. Now it is important to focus on one thing: the exam to improve your rank. And, together with the rest of the cadets from the 5th grade, successfully passed this test. Meanwhile, Sol-ah waited for news about the exam results while eating the cupcakes that Jae-hak had left in his office for guests. Jae-hak replied that it hadn't been long since all the second years had entered, so they needed to wait a bit longer. Sol-ah was eagerly awaiting the good news that Chol had been eliminated, as she hated him and everyone like him. Besides, Hwa-young promised to reward them well if everything went as planned. But Jae-hak was tormented by doubts about the smoothness of the plan. Jae-hak remembered Myung-jun's words about Chol not being his rival. He laughed it off back then, but something was still bothering him. And at that moment he received an SMS with the exam results on his phone. Jae-hak was so surprised that he was speechless, and Sol-ah was already beside herself with interest. She snatched the phone from her younger brother to see what was on it herself. According to preliminary exam results, 21 people were expelled, 15 dropped out, and the entire 5th grade of the first year successfully survived. Sol-a was furious. Couldn't any of the second years knock out one little boy? Jae-hak was shocked by this news. It seemed like he really had underestimated his younger brother. Meanwhile, the two guys who were hunting exclusively for Chol became his target themselves. They tried to hide in a cave, hoping that the young man would not be able to find them. But their hope was dashed when a sword suddenly flew at them. Chol found them and decided to teach them a lesson by breaking one of their arms. The second attacker tried to talk to Chol, saying that even if he was the direct heir, he couldn't just do whatever he wanted. But Chol didn't care about his chatter about who could do what. After all, if he points a knife at his direct descendants, he must pay for it. Another group of attackers was successfully dealt with, but it would have been difficult for Chol to deal with them alone. He was helped by his fellow cadets, and after dealing with those two, the young master asked Kyong Ha to join Han, since someone was probably still targeting them. So Chol continued on his own, telling Kyong Ha to look over the names on his list and continue collecting nameplates. Because the most important thing in this exam is the number of nameplates collected. So the young man formed a hypothesis about whether he could find the tablets using the demon eyes, and his hypothesis turned out to be correct. With the help of the demon eyes, he managed to find the nameplates. Now the exam has become even easier for Chol, and collecting the required number of tablets will not be difficult for him. Plus, it was a great opportunity to gain control over the new ability. Chol got so carried away that he seemed to have collected too many tablets. Even too much. Now you can be sure that he passed the exam. But the most important thing is that now he won't have to train the demon eye. Since the exam was almost over, the fighting continued from dawn. Meanwhile, Chol has found So-hyun, whom he'd been trying to avoid until now. However, it seems she'll start to irritate him if he continues. So-hyun thought she had surprised her younger brother with her sudden appearance. But Chol knew that she was watching him, so he was not surprised by her appearance. Even though the young master was being hunted by crowds of other cadets, It was not difficult for him to notice So Hyun. In any case, So Hyun was determined to fight her younger brother on equal terms in the exam to prove her strength. And if she manages to defeat her younger brother, he will call her his older sister. Chol agreed, but he was curious about what would happen if he won. If he won, So Hyun would call him Big Brother. But for Chul, it felt more like a psychological attack than a reward for winning. The battle between the two heirs had begun. So Hyun was confident she would be able to defeat her younger brother. But confidence alone wasn't enough. After successfully completing the promotion exam, the grading system became even stricter. And this semester's exam, which Choi participated in along with two direct heirs, became a hot topic of discussion. The cadets were actively discussing who would come first on the exam. Most thought it would be So Hyun or one of the other second-year students. No one even wanted to acknowledge the victory of Chol and the other cadets from the 5th grade. But still, the young gentleman managed to become the best in the exam and improve his rank. Chol didn't think that he would get the highest overall rank among everyone in the exam. Perhaps if So Hyun had done better, but Chol took all of her nameplates for himself after winning the sparring match. Junho also congratulated Chul on his victory, as being among the best cadets in the corps is a great achievement. The other 5th grade cadets were also pleased with the young gentleman's achievements. The next to receive his rank will be In Ha, who also showed his skills in the exam. In Ha rose in rank to 13th place in the rankings. He was glad about this because for the first time in 2 years he managed to raise his rank. Bong Sun was also promoted to a new rank, taking 24th place in the rankings. Khan worked hard to get a promotion in his first year. He managed to take 34th place in the ranking, which disappointed him a little. But Han wasn't about to give up. This was just the beginning. He would become as strong as Chul. Bo Sung was also determined to show his best side, as he decided to change himself so as not to be a burden and lead a dishonest life anymore. In Ha was of the same opinion. He would become even stronger and would not lose to Chul. Chol became not only a good teacher for the cadets, but also a role model. The young gentleman couldn't even believe that it was finally all over and the boys were able to raise their ranks. He also congratulated the boys on their promotion, saying that they had all done well and trained hard. Chol wanted to engage in personal training with those who were not promoted, but fortunately this did not happen. However, the second year will be much more difficult, and there will be even more ill-wishers who will want to tear them apart. But the cadets didn't care. They were confident that they would now easily overcome all the difficulties that came their way. Chol was of the same opinion. Even though everyone disliked him at first, he was able to lead people. Meanwhile, So Hyun refused to admit defeat in the exam. But Chol didn't care, because he didn't even understand that she didn't admit it. So Hyun called him a brazen cheater. Not only did he defeat her, but he also took the tablets, which is why she had to get them again. The young man was only worried about how long it had taken him to defeat her. It had taken him over an hour to defeat his older sister. So Hyun turned out to be stronger than he thought, but she had not yet unlocked the energy of her sword or learned how to properly use her abilities. If she had this knowledge, she would be able to defeat Chol without a chance for him, so the young man thought. At this point, So Hyun reminded him of the promised reward for victory. After all, a promise is a promise, and from now on she would call him Big Brother. But Chol was more irritated by this than happy, so he asked not to say that again. The young lady did not understand why he did not like it so much, but there was no time to discuss it, because they could be late for their father. Finding themselves in front of the door to the clan head's office, the young master and mistress were a little worried. But there was no time for this, and Chol opened the door. Entering the room, they greeted their father, kneeling as a sign of respect. Tae-shin was also glad to see them and asked them to sit down. Father heard that both heirs had successfully completed their first course of cadet training. He was interested in what each of them saw and felt. So Hyun looked at Chol as if she was waiting for him to say something first. But she still decided to speak first, saying that during cadet training she saw the true face of their family. Father didn't quite understand what she meant, so Hyun replied that she knew the entire system was based on competition, but she'd seen things happen that she couldn't tolerate. She was for fairness in any form. Tae-shin was happy to see how his youngest daughter had grown. She used to be more whiny and shy, but now she had become bolder. He assumed that Choi was the reason for her changes, so he was also curious about what the younger one felt in his first year. Chol replied that he felt only shame. The cadet corps is the foundation of the martial arts clan, but the current corps is not functioning properly. This answer did not exactly please Tae-shin. He expected to hear something else. The young man added that the cadets didn't fight. They might be weak or losing, but those who stop fighting are not fit for the Lee clan. And the main problem was the ability of the teachers or the teaching methods. They were too kind to the cadets. Chol's speech sounded extremely self-confident, and his father appreciated it. It is admirable that each child develops their own way of thinking while being a cadet. But one must always be on guard. Expanding one's horizons is very difficult. Chul was surprised by his words, as his father had never given them such advice before. The children thanked their father for his advice and promised to take it into account in the future. Tae-shin also heard how they had managed to pass the exams, which had been different from previous ones at his request. He was proud that the heirs understood this and conscientiously fulfilled their duties. So he summoned them to reward them, although he's usually strict when it comes to rewards and punishments. So Hyun didn't hesitate and immediately said that in that case she wanted dragon-scale armor. Tae-shin agreed and replied that he would inform the armory so that she could pick them up tomorrow. Chol, in turn, asked his father for permission to climb the mountain of heavenly power. This excited Tae-shin and greatly surprised So-hyun, but his father did not refuse his request. Chol was gathering the things he would take with him to the mountain. He took an encyclopedia of herbs, an iron cauldron, and a couple of other medical instruments. The mountain of heavenly power is a sacred mountain where many of the things that will help the young man make powerful elixirs grow. On the island, he could only make weak medicines, but now he will be able to make stronger medicines and pass the warrior's test earlier. The warrior's trial is the final quest for the children of the Lee clan, after which they are officially recognized as warriors. The place they must visit before passing it is Mount Jongwisan, or the Mountain of Heavenly Power. Moreover, this mountain was a place he simply had to visit one day, to finally reveal the secrets of his sword, which he chose at the Ritual of Steel. While Chol was packing his things, the nanny knocked on his room door. She apologized for disturbing him and informed him that he had received a message. Chul didn't quite understand what the message was, but Gahwa added that it was an invitation from the seventh heir of the Lee clan. Jae-hak was happy to see his younger brother again. The last time they saw each other was after Chuseok, the Korean Harvest Festival. The young master confirmed this and was glad that his elder brother had not forgotten about it. Jae-hak replied that he was not so stupid as to forget such things. As Cheol expected, the conversation with Jae-hak would not be too simple. Although it was a normal conversation between brothers over a cup of tea, he still felt that something was wrong. Jae-hak suggested he try the new tea. Tea was his only hobby, so it had to be great. Chol did not refuse the offer, also asking if he always treated his guests to tea. The elder brother replied that it depended on who his guest was. The tea in their cups came from a foreign plantation he had visited 2 years ago. Even after a few sips, he was in no hurry to get to the main point. Chul knew perfectly well how to keep a situation under control, and Jae-hak was once again convinced that he had underestimated the younger man. So Jae-hak decided to be the first to ask questions. He asked his younger brother if he knew that the exam incident had been planned by him and Sol-ah. Of course, Cheol guessed about this, but not without So-hyun's help. Jae-hak is better known as a politician, administrator, and businessman than as a military man. He knows how to build relationships without causing hostility, which is why people call him Golden Sword. Yet, Chol didn't see him as an enemy. Jae-hak continued to talk about the exam, admitting his guilt in the incident, and ready to apologize if Chol needed it. But Chol replied that there was no need to apologize. He wasn't obligated to demand one. This answer surprised his older brother. The young man added that this was normal, as similar things would often happen in their future competitions. After all, Jae-hak and Sol-ah did this of their own free will, and not because they had no choice due to Mrs. Beck's wishes. He asked the boy if he considered him an enemy. Chol replied that he did, because he couldn't think otherwise of a man who touched his people and openly plotted against him. This left Jae-hak stunned. He didn't know what to do, whether he should crush the boy now to avoid future troubles. But he still decided to simply ask his younger brother what he wanted from him. Chol asked him to show a little sincerity, because this time it was not only the young man who suffered. Jae-hak liked that the boy was demanding compensation instead of an apology. So he agreed to send a decent amount of elixir to the 5th grade students, as well as give a decent reward. Chol was grateful, and since his brother had made many concessions, he would not raise the issue again. Jae-hak replied that Cheol would probably be the only brother he understood the most, but the young heir wasn't sure about that. After such a pleasant conversation, Cheol thanked Jae-hak for his hospitality and said that it was time for him to leave. Before leaving, his older brother gave him a little advice to be careful with Sol-ah, because unlike him, she really doesn't like him. Chol replied that it didn't matter because he would be home for the next year. Meanwhile, in the room of the sixth heiress, Sol Ah, the situation escalated. Hwa-young was disappointed in her daughter and that she was unable to get Chol to pass the exam. After that, she didn't even want her daughter to call her mother because she didn't raise her to be such a loser. But Sula tried to justify herself to her mother, saying that she wasn't trying to use the mission as an excuse to run away. But Hwa-young was furious at Sola's failure and didn't want to see her after that. Sol A didn't understand why her mother didn't even want to listen to her and was furious. What she did was simply run away from responsibility, something a descendant of the Lee clan should never do. If Sol A were Hwa-young's real child, she wouldn't have tolerated this act. But the daughter didn't understand why she couldn't take responsibility for it right now. What's stopping her from dealing with the illegitimate heir right now? The thing was that Chol was going to the Heavenly Power Mountain for a whole year. Therefore, it was necessary to deal with him before this moment. Now it is too late. Perhaps Sol A could have fixed something, but she messed everything up, and with this incident she exposed all her direct descendants. As she left, Hwa-young only said that if her daughter showed such a pathetic sight next time, she wouldn't get off with a simple blow. At this time, Jae-hak, who also failed his task, approached Sol A's room, but Hwa-young did not take it out on him. Sol A was beside herself with anger. The only thing she wanted at that moment was to kill the youngest heir. Jae-hak understood how cruel Hwa-young was, and that after something like this, his older sister would be obsessed with the idea of making amends. That's why he was curious about who would be stronger, Sul Ah or Chol. Who of them was more valuable? A year later, on the day the boy returns, Jae-hak will witness an amazing sight. Getting into the car to go to Heavenly Power Mountain, Chol was a little surprised and felt uncomfortable. He didn't understand why the butler was going with him, but Choi replied that it was only for a couple of short days. The butler was glad that their paths crossed by chance. He had something to ask the young master. He's just going to visit the graves before the Lunar New Year. He also needs to convey something to the mountain's guardian, and besides, he's here on behalf of the patriarch. Chol replied that he was glad of his presence. Now he would not be so lonely. But still he did not believe that their meeting was a coincidence. Choi, although he looked like an ordinary butler, still possessed some kind of power, because it was not for nothing that his role in the clan was higher than the other elders. Chol couldn't even measure the distance in power between them. The butler heard that the young man wanted to visit Mount Sunmu before heading to Jongwisan, and asked him why the young heir had decided to visit the ancestral mountain. Chol replied that he also wanted to visit his ancestors' graves before leaving to pay his respects. Choi was delighted with the young man's actions. Many older generations will look favorably on his ancestor worship. The butler wanted to ask Chol about something else, first asking if the young man would like to talk. Chol replied that he didn't mind, and Choi asked him if he liked hiking, to which the young man replied that he had never been on a real hike before. The butler understood him. He had also climbed various mountains before. Once he climbed a rocky mountain where there was no path, so he made his own way. Choi asked the young master how he would climb such a mountain. The young man replied that in that case he would climb slowly and calmly, looking up, and then he would definitely be able to climb the mountain. Choi confirmed his words. In this way, the young man would indeed be able to rise to the top. But it works a little differently. Sometimes you need to look back or to the side to make sure you're moving in the right direction. If you only look up, you can lose your way and end up a long way off. The higher the mountain, the harder it is to climb. Chol understood what the butler was talking about. He was hinting at that very warrior's test. After his reincarnation, Choi was busy acquiring new things and completely forgot to master his acquired abilities. But he didn't think this was a problem. With this approach, he would have achieved his goal sooner or later. The young master thanked the butler for his wise words. What was more important was that they arrived at the right place. Mount Sunmu is another important place that Chol must visit. The young heir had heard that only those who bore the blood of the La clan or had permission to do so could pass through the gates of Mount Sunmu. He was curious to know if Choi could pass through. Choi replied that he was honored to receive permission from the patriarch of the Lee clan himself. On the way, Choi said he was going to visit his ancestors' graves and asked what the young man would do in the meantime. He replied that he would visit the memorial plaque to the clan's founder. As Chul passed through the gate, he felt a strange sensation. It felt like he had entered a completely different world, where everything felt different. At this point, his paths with the butler diverge, Choi telling the young man that he hopes that he will achieve what he wants. Chol thanked the butler and went on his way. He arrived at the tomb of the first patriarch, the founder of the great Lee clan. Opening the door and entering the room, Chol said, A representative of the Li clan, respected for its military merits, pays respects to the founder of the clan, as a sign of respect to the founder. This place was rightfully considered sacred because it belonged to the very first patriarch of the clan. Drawing a sword at the grave of his ancestors was quite rude, but Chol could do nothing about it, because he was acting in accordance with what the founder himself had prepared. He put down the sword he had chosen during the steel ritual, the great weapon of the Li clan's founder himself, the Black Twilight. But the Black Twilight is not just an ordinary sword, but rather a super powerful weapon. It was a family secret that his older brother managed to uncover before his reincarnation. There were 9 seals on it, and Chol knew about only 4 of them. The first seal stated that the owner had to prove his skill. The second seal required one to prove one's affiliation with the Li clan by being respected in the army. The third seal was to undergo the naming ceremony created by the founder of the Li clan himself. And so, he managed to fulfill the conditions of all 3 seals. Now he needed a new clue, and that's why he came to the grave of the founder of the Li clan. After spilling water on the sword, it began to shine. And along with it, the portrait of the founder, on which something appeared. This was the next clue, and it was located on Mount Chonwi itself, where Chol was planning to head. Chonwi, also known as Mount Chonwisan, became the mountain of heavenly power after the clan's founder sensed its energy and subsequently chose this place to teach future generations. The mana around was very thick. Chul had seen it in the recordings, but this was the first time he had seen it in person. Meanwhile, the butler, who had also finished his business, approached him. Together, they discussed how beautiful the mountain landscapes could be, and Chol noted that Zhonghuisan was different from Songmu and other mountains. But their modest conversation was interrupted by a stranger who looked like a drunk and grumbled about how noisy it was around again. Suddenly, defenders from the Li clan appeared next to him and the butler. Choi didn't even notice how they appeared. The stranger was taken even further by surprise by their appearance, and he asked them to put away their swords kindly. But the guards refused and prepared to move into a fighting stance. But the stranger's huge and powerful palm was already behind one of them. With a powerful blow, he simply trampled the guard's head into the ground. He wanted to resolve everything peacefully, but it looks like a fight is inevitable. Chol was simply surprised by the stranger's strength, looking at how the guards could not do anything against him. In the end, it was not difficult for the stranger to defeat them. He easily overpowered several men, turning their weapons into scrap metal. He was amused by their attack because they didn't have the slightest chance against him. The stranger knew the butler and asked him why he hadn't given at least a month's notice of his arrival. Besides, if he showed up without a drink, he was finished. Choi apologized for this but still noted that he had gone too far. His words only made the stranger even more angry. Was the butler really so bold as to respond to him? But Chol still didn't understand who this man was. The butler apologized for the late introduction. He introduced the stranger as the guardian of Mount Zhonghuisan. He was also surprised when he saw the Lunosha. Could it really be the same boy Tai Shin had picked up on the street?